I had this friend who was really into the occult. Unfortunately, I was the one who got him turned onto it. We had a mutual appreciation of the paranormal and all things weird, so I thought the subject would interest him. He started going deep into the subject, to the point where he wouldn't talk about anything else. He would actually interrupt a conversation and force the subject back to occult matters. Rude. But sometimes people go through phases where their interest is all they really want to talk about. It was a mostly forgivable offense. I think I should mention that this particular friend didn't have a very large friend circle. His depression and introverted nature kept him inside a lot. He didn't have the best of luck in relationships with women. His world was kind of small, and I did enjoy hanging out with him. So I did my best to be a good friend. I didn't want to just brush him off because he was acting a little weirder than normal. Honestly, for the longest time, he was a totally normal guy. We'd chat, play together on the PlayStation, sometimes go and see movies with my boyfriend accompanying us, and we all hung out at the park. We went swimming, and overall had a good time hanging out. Things started to go downhill when he started to smoke DMT. Personally, I think psychedelics are amazing tools that can offer you insight into your life, but they should be treated with respect. My friend got to the point where he was making it himself. Apparently it's pretty easy to do after a meager amount of research, and he was smoking it daily, multiple times a day. For those of you who are not familiar with the substance, when you smoke it, you get transported to a different world, an entirely new plane of existence. Your body and yourself no longer exist. You're just exploring this alternate reality dreamscape. My personal experience with it led me to see a dragon once in this kaleidoscope of a cornucopia. People see all kinds of different things there, but I digress. Now imagine what that does to a person when they're smoking it 30 plus times a day. He started telling me things like how he was the reincarnated Osiris. He said he was seeing Egyptian hieroglyphs all over the place in waking life. Apparently, he had hour-long conversations with entities in his bedroom, even when he wasn't smoking. Of course, I was very alarmed to hear all of this and told him he needed to take a serious break. No drugs for a few months so he can find solid footing in reality again. At this point I was still hanging out with him because he obviously needed some help. And like I said, he didn't have a lot of friends that could give him that. He was also the black sheep of the family, so I knew he wasn't getting any support from them. He was really close to his sister, and I did reach out to her on Facebook to express my concerns. I pushed her to talk to him into getting some psychiatric help, because he was slipping past the point of no return. I'm not really sure if she took my messages seriously, since we didn't really know each other. Plus, she was at least 6 years younger than us, and possibly didn't grasp how serious the situation was becoming. In any case, I'll jump forward now to the part where things start to get really creepy. My boyfriend had made arrangements to hang out with our friend at the park. I didn't really want to go because I felt like I needed a break from him and his nonsensical ranting. I couldn't deal with it on that particular day. My boyfriend says he wasn't all that bad, and we went anyway. We get to the park, and he is his usual self, ranting about Egypt and how made-up gods that only he knew the truth about. He also had a large hunting knife that he kept fiddling with the whole time we were on our walk. He told us that he had been using it in ceremonial magic and that it helped to banish negative thoughts. It made me extremely uneasy. He would do this thing where he would take the knife and make stabbing motions near his heart or head, like he was mock stabbing himself, all while holding a conversation with me and my boyfriend. I think we're both really on edge, and I didn't know what to say or do about it. I tried to distract him from doing it by bringing up other subjects that may interest him, but he kept on with his ritual. Keep in mind, we're walking on a trail, so it's not like we could say goodbye there and then. We had to walk back to our car and drop him off at his car. My boyfriend then had the bright idea that we should get some lunch after all, even though I was doing my best to give him a look that said, "No, you crazy son of a, why do you think I want to spend more time with this nut?" But it must not have been very effective, or my boyfriend was ignoring it. Either way, we ended up getting in the car to get lunch. In the car, I was driving and my boyfriend was in the passenger seat, and our weirdo friend was in the back. As we're heading through a busy part of town where all the shopping and restaurants are, I hear the distinctive sound of a belt buckle coming undone. Then I hear the worst sound imaginable. I peek back out of the corner of my eye, and my suspicions were confirmed. This crazy nut was full on jacking off in our back seat. I mean pants all the way down, bare ass, everything, beating it so hard it was almost like he wanted to tear it off. Instantly I felt sick to my stomach, and all the nervous energy I had throughout the day popped into my head. I was trying not to shake, and trying to ignore it and drive through heavy traffic. I kind of have a freeze response, I guess. The whole time I kept thinking about that huge ass knife he had in his pocket, and obviously he was completely off his rocker now. I was afraid to say anything or confront him, because I didn't know how he was going to react. This part is nuts. But my boyfriend didn't seem to notice, and the whole time he kept on rambling about God knows what. I couldn't listen because my thoughts were 100% focused on driving and trying to act like I didn't know what was in my back seat. We get to the restaurant, and my boyfriend runs inside to grab food, and I am the only one left alone in the car with our friend, and try to act like I'm browsing on my phone, when really, I'm watching and listening as hard as I can. We don't talk. My boyfriend gets back, and I complain that I'm tired, and that it had been a long day, and to just drop him off. So I drive us back to our friend's car, and he doesn't get out of the vehicle. He just sits there. I have to get a little bit rude and ask him to please get out and go home. He exits the car and walks over to his passenger side. I start getting really scared, and I suspected the worst. He pulled a gun out of some kind of bag he had on the seat, and just walks over to our car with it. I don't know why I did this, but I was so pissed I got out of my car and walked right up to him. I was maybe 3 feet away, and could see it was a loaded 9mm. I kept asking him over and over, "What are you doing?" Because apparently that's all my brain could do. I told him to get in his car and go home. He never said anything this whole time, just kind of cried, and had this weird look in his eye. For whatever reason, he did eventually get back into the car and drive off, and I told my boyfriend that we are never hanging out with him again, and that I don't want to talk to him or see him anymore. No contact. Nada. A few months passed, and he occasionally messages me through the PlayStation or texts my phone. He says a lot of random stuff and I ignore it. It turns out he moved down to Tennessee near Nashville. I don't know why. He had a roommate and I think their girlfriend lived there? I'm not too sure on the situation. I think maybe he's turning his life around and getting a fresh start down there, and I think it's best to cut all contact with him and let him regroup. I'm not interested in any kind of friendship with him, and I know he needs help beyond anything that I could offer. But again I reach out to his sister and let her know that he had a gun. She managed to get it from him somehow, but it did little good in the end. I get a call about 11 PM one night that wakes me up. It's a man claiming he's a detective down in Gallatin, Tennessee, and my heart skips a beat. I start sweating and immediately ask what happened. Apparently my former friend stabbed someone to death on Halloween Day. I don't know all the details, and the articles about it are kind of sparse. The whole thing is kind of surreal, and I'm just left feeling like I'm lucky that I didn't get shot last summer. I still feel creeped out and sick by the whole ordeal. At the time, I was a 17-year-old female, and I started a job last summer working at a local hole-in-the-wall pet store in my city. They were grossly understaffed with only 7 employees. Not only that, but I was the only girl, and the only employee under the age of 22. I was very naive and trusting of people at the time, and constantly gave people the benefit of the doubt. After working there, my mindset changed drastically. A lot of the customers were really predatory towards me, and I could make an entirely different post about that. But today I'm going to talk to you about 2 of my co-workers, Mike and Jim. Mike was seemingly nice, albeit a little weird. He was super tall and skinny, and honestly could have passed as a 20-year-old stoner. Jim was a retired army veteran who wasn't technically an employee but volunteered there in his free time. He was also very tall, had some piercings and a shaved head. Jim and Mike were close friends and actually lived together. I'd strike up conversations with both of them when work was slow, and wasn't intimidated by them at all. My first red flag. My first day of working there, I was taking out the trash and had to open the garage at the back of the store to get the trash bin. I asked Mike for help, since I wasn't strong enough to lift it. He said, "It's not that you're not strong, you're just small. You wear it well though," and looked me up and down. Weird, but I thought he was just trying to be nice. My third day working, Mike and I were the only ones closing the store. We were making small talk. He told me he was 32 and that he had 3 kids with 3 different women, then proceeded to tell me in vivid detail how each of these kids were conceived. Like, super personal stuff you wouldn't be telling a coworker, much less someone you knew for 3 days. Weird, but he was a weird dude, and I thought perhaps he was just very bad at picking up on social cues. Mike would also walk me to my car a lot after work. We were usually the only ones closing, and it was always dark. At first I thought it was a really kind thing to do. We would talk for a bit and I'd get in and drive off, but he would talk to me for longer periods of time each day. He would walk out and sit on the curb near my car, lighting a cigarette and inviting me to join him. I'd politely decline because I didn't want him to know that I smoked. I was worried about my reputation. Lol. One day he actually put his hand on my car door after I opened it, holding it open so that I could shut it. I made some excuse to leave and he let go. I thought it was just an accident that he didn't realize he was holding it open. I was constantly making excuses for him. A few days later I heard Mike talking to a customer. I had no idea on the context, but I heard Mike say, "If an underage girl and a guy are together, right, the girl should be charged with something. When I went to court, they couldn't arrest me because the girl was blackmailing me." I seriously can't make this up. I met Jim after working there about a week and a half. He had a super dry and sarcastic sense of humor, and I honestly used that to excuse a lot of the things he said to me. When he found out I was 17, assuming Mike told him, he would always make fun of me, saying things like, "Isn't it past your bedtime?" Or whatever. I thought it was funny. I'd call him an old man even though he was only 35 and we'd joke around. One day I forgot to do one of my pre-closing duties, but Jim told me he would take care of it. I was super apologetic about it, and he puts his hands on my arm and said, "At least you're good to look at." I laughed it off. He would constantly make comments about my appearance, telling me my shirt was too tight or that I looked a lot older than I should. It started getting more serious. One time I signed my name for the pre-closing checklist, and Jim picked it up. He was like, "Oh, I now know your last name. Could totally stalk you if I wanted." Another co-worker heard him and was like, "Dude, at least wait till she's 18. Jim turned and asked me, "How long till you're 18 then?" I told him around 2 months and he was just like, "Nah, I can't wait that long." The next day Jim came in. He looked at me and asked if I drove a green car. I said I did. He then recited my license plate back to me. "Told you I was going to stalk ya." This definitely made alarm bells go off in my head, but I desperately wanted to believe it was all part of a joke. Even remembering this part gives me chills. After this incident, there were multiple times that I was followed after leaving work by a white car. Luckily, my work was in the downtown area of my city, and I lived very far west, so most of the time I lost the car before I even got near home. Though one time, the car did follow me all the way out to my neighborhood. Instead of entering my neighborhood, I just kept driving and ended up in the countryside outside the city. I'm very familiar with this area and was able to lose the car out there. It was easily one of the most terrifying moments of my life. I have no proof this was Jim, since he never closed the store, and I didn't know what car he drove. It only happened while I was leaving work, and it stopped after I quit. I put in my 2 weeks' notice after about a month working there, unrelated to the creepiness. Once Mike and Jim found out I was leaving, they'd tell me how much they'd miss me, and kept inviting me over to their house for co-worker game night, where they'd have everyone play board games and such. I reminded them that I was 17 and couldn't drink. They told me they didn't care and that I could probably drink anyway. Mike constantly asked for my phone number to set up a time for game night, but I always ended up getting distracted with something else before I could. My last day working there, I was closing with Mike, and he was like, "Bet your boyfriend's happy you don't have to work with me and Jim anymore." Like an idiot, I told him I didn't have one. I asked him why he said that. "Well, me and Jim are kinda creeps. We take the pride of being creepy. It's like running a competition between us." The rest of the closing time, he was all over me, touching me, not in a sexual way, walking right up to me and essentially putting his body against mine. At one point I was leaning against the counter and he put his hand on either side of me and was towering over me, trapping me there. He said, "We're never going to have another girl working here like you." I left quickly after that. I was driving home and finally added up the behavior and comments and connected the dots. I couldn't believe I was so oblivious. I genuinely think that if I kept working there, something a lot worse would have happened. When living in a major metropolitan city, you never know what walks of life you will pass or drop off. So, a little backstory. In 2003, I was a 16-year-old employee at an urban clothing store here on the south side of Chicago. At the time, I had a manager who was in his early 20s by the name of Anthony. Anthony was pretty arrogant and obnoxious, but overall he was a pretty cool guy. I used to kind of give him crap and tease him when it came to approaching the ladies, because he always seemed too timid or too aggressive. I was and still am a ladies' man, so yeah, I was being an ass. After working at this place for about 3 months, Anthony asks me if I drop him off at his home. It wasn't far from the direction I was heading in, so I dropped him off maybe twice a week for the next month. Now let me tell you, these car rides were uncomfortable. This guy, as much as we spoke at work, would not speak and sort of just kept looking straight. It got to the point that his awkwardness went from entertaining, as I was 16. Most awkward people are interesting to teenagers, to straight creepy. Fast forward 3 years later. I'm watching the news as they go into horrific details of a crime committed by a Comcast installation worker. Apparently, the Comcast worker entered 2 homes he was due for an installation, raped, beat, and strangled 2 women. The real unfortunate thing is this happened on 2 different occasions, and after the first murder the gentleman was arrested and questioned, but released and was sent back to work, which allowed him to strike again. As the picture of his mugshot flashed on the screen, I froze. It was Anthony. Now, growing up on the south side of Chicago, I have grown up and befriended a fair share of people who grew up to be murderers, but this took the cake. So Anthony Triplet, let's not meet, because that would only mean I'd be in jail with you. Okay, so I'm not conventionally pretty nor classically pretty. I'm the Duffy in any friend group I'm in. I never worried about being hit on, disrespected or kidnapped. I've never had to worry about my own safety when I go out, as I was never the one anyone wanted to get to know or be around because I am so plain, and it's always me that has to be the lookout for my friends, male and female alike. Now I like to go to a local bar almost daily. I don't drink alcohol there, just a normal Coke, and wait for my ride home. It's my usual hangout spot after work, so I just sit and chill and mind my own business. A few weeks ago I'd gotten off work and was just chilling at my usual spot, and sipping on my drink while working on a new pendant I was making.
I started wire wrapping crystals into jewellery. I didn't think anyone would try and talk to me since I basically blended into the walls, even though the staff knew me and paid slight attention to me and are nice to me, but this weird guy I'd never seen before came over and sat at my table across from me. I was surprised and looked up at him, and struck up a small conversation that I can't remember how it started, but he began talking to me and asked a few questions about myself, and I thought they were normal and they all flowed together, so I didn't think much of them. Again, I'm plain. I didn't think anyone would want to do anything to me. I had just drank 3 glasses of soda by then, and had to use the restroom, so grabbed my phone and purse and went to the bathroom. I may not have been worried about being abducted, but I did worry about my identity cache and contacts. And I was back a few minutes later and resumed my work. Since none of my stuff had been touched, I called over a waitress and asked her for a new drink. And she nodded, as it had always been ingrained to me that you never leave your drink unattended, and if you do, have it remade or just leave it to the bartender. As she was going to grab my old drink, which I only taken a few sips out of, the guy got a bit huffy at me, saying I was being wasteful just ordering a new drink. I looked at him with a raised eyebrow in confusion. I asked why it was his business if I did. It was my money after all, and the refills were free. He then said I was making more work for the waitress for no reason. This annoyed me, and I again told him that it was my business, and that if he didn't like it he can always leave. He then tried to wave the waitress off with letting her change my drink, but I'd had enough of his nonsense and told him flat out, "Then you drink it, if you think it's such a waste." It seemed to have caught him off guard, and he looked at me, shocked, and then was a bit angry before leaving. I then looked at the drink and handed it to the waitress and told her that something didn't feel right about the guy, and I asked if the bartender could keep an eye on him, and they'd dump out my drink and just bring me water from then on. I left for home after being picked up shortly after, and found out the next day after work that he had been arrested for assault. I didn't find out till today what exactly happened. Apparently he had gotten into a fight with the bartender working that night. The bartender caught him putting something into a girl's drink when she wasn't looking, and stopped her from drinking it. The guy got so mad it started a whole fight. The cops were called and now he's awaiting trial. Apparently, as he's trying to see if he can get someone like me who's always had her guard down for herself because my confidence was low, he thought I'd be an easy mark with just a little attention. But when I didn't just drink my drink, when I came back he had to try another girl. If he really was targeting me, I have to question his sanity and sobriety. Thank goodness those old lessons about safety growing up. Thank you, Mum and Dad. And to the guy at the bar, let's never meet again.
I have this close friend, Jack, who relayed this to me. It's a pretty terrifying tale of something that happened to his friend a long time ago. My mentor Jack is now a retired former HR community college guy in his mid-60s. 30 years ago, however, Jack was working as a bartender in a bar in Portland's gay community. That's how Jack met Randy. Randy was a good-looking, well-spoken customer in his mid-20s, pretty attractive 80s, preppy type. Randy lived close to Jack. The two went on a few dates for a few weeks. Randy was relatively new to Portland, having moved there a few years ago after his parents, in a small town in Connecticut, flipped out about him being gay and tried to commit him to an institution. They were casually dating, but Jack was shocked when he discovered this clean-shaven college graduate was working the streets of Portland as a hustler. You see, while we think of Portland as being a hipster haven now, back in the 80s there were a lot of seedy elements to the town, and that included the gay underground prostitution scene. The revelation about Randy's career happened this way. Randy called Jack one night and asked him if he could come over. He showed up at Jack's apartment pretty upset. It was there that Randy confessed to Jack that he was a prostitute, and he then relayed a wild tale about something that had happened to him the night before with a client. He refused to name who it was, but told Jack it was a very prominent local businessman, someone that was very high profile in mid-1980s Portland. The client was into S&M/bondage stuff, and Randy had seen him about once a month for a year. The previous night, After they had concluded their scene, the client said to Randy, "I had a fantasy that I kidnapped you and kept you forever." He asked Randy if he wanted to stay with him. Of course, Randy said, "No way," and the guy got angry. The chauffeur drove Randy home, which was in hindsight a huge mistake. The client now knew where he lived. Earlier that evening, Randy was heading home, but before he got to his apartment, Randy noticed his client's limo parked down the street from his building. So Randy noped the hell out of there and ate dinner elsewhere. But when he went home, the limo was still there, chauffeur sitting in the car. That's when he decided to go over to Jack's place and confess everything. Randy was completely terrified now. He tried to laugh it off as some dumb joke, but the fact that the chauffeur had spent hours parked in the same spot a few blocks from his apartment building was scary as hell. Randy begged if he could just stay in Jack's place for a few days so that this could die down. Even though Jack was totally surprised and pretty confused about all of this, he let him stay at his place until a few days later. Randy called him at work and told Jack he decided to go back to his apartment. Randy said he'd call Jack later in the week about a movie that they were planning to see that weekend. Jack never heard from him again. When Jack went to his apartment building a few days later to check on Randy, the building manager said that Randy had moved out. After that, there wasn't much Jack could do. Randy didn't tell him who the guy was, and he didn't know much about Randy's background except for some vague idea of where he came from. And this was again the 1980s. Policemen were not going to make a big deal about some male prostitute that went missing. Jack kept hoping that he'd get a call from Randy at some exotic locale, but as days turned into weeks, which then turned into years, which then turned into a quarter of a century, he stopped expecting that call. Hopefully Randy just skipped town. Maybe he ran all the way back to Connecticut, found some sympathetic family member who helped get him on his feet, and he's put all of this behind him, and he's just some regular 50-something-year-old guy now, with a regular career and regular concerns. Or maybe not. Perhaps the guy did get to him. But in Jack's case, he will never know. I am a 23-year-old Italian male, living in a not-so-small town in southern Italy. Now, it's not the most secure town in the world. In fact, we have a long history of micro-criminality connected to the local mafia. But if you're smart, you keep yourself out of trouble. I need to explain my daily commute and context first to make things better to understand. I live in the old part of town, as here it's very common for every town to be built around its antique part. And after around 1980, earthquakes destroyed a good part of it, so it's very affordable to live here. And some parts are beautiful and well kept, where others aren't. So you find good families and great folks sharing spaces with more pesky dudes. Doesn't help that the town's castle has been converted into a prison. Yes, what the hell, Italy. Luckily only for minor offenders. Now, for the encounter itself, this happened in January. I just came back from uni. It's a 20-minute drive in the car, but with awful public transport, it takes anywhere from an hour to 2 hours to get home. And I like to study in the library until it closes at 6:30. And I usually get home at 8 PM or later, and I'm greeted by my dog, Maya. She's a 1-year-old lab, and I take her for a walk around this part of town and the castle, since it's her favorite spot to meet other street dogs. She was taking longer than usual to do her business, and it was freezing, and I was wearing clothes a little bit lighter than I should. Plus it was snowing, which is super rare here. Maya saw snow and was very excited. It was at that point I decided to walk back home and grab a jacket, to better take delight of the occasion. And on my walk home, I cut through and past this abandoned building under construction. It was just the pillars and floor done, but a lot of kids used to play and climb around it. I was just taking the shortcut when I see this guy standing there with his back facing me, still as a rock, with his head facing up to the first floor of the abandoned building, wearing a dirty beanie, heavy winter jacket and a tracksuit, far too wide for his build. And there he was. At first I was frozen in spot, but it wasn't an extraordinary encounter, since there are a lot of weird people around here. Then I decided to pass on, but the first red flag was when I watched Maya, and she had her back fur raised and was looking at this guy dead. She never did this, and as we walked she kept this odd behavior up. I realized I'd never seen him around these parts, and I knew he wasn't local. His face was creepy, greasy hair, a 3-day beard, and he extended his hand to Maya. Stupidly, that calmed her down a bit. Maybe he was just mentally ill walking around. But anyway, there's a dormitory for mentally ill people not too far from here. But when he was trying to pet my dog, I hear something moving on the first floor. I thought it may have been a cat, but Maya would have already been jumping around if she had smelt it. I looked around and see this little girl of about 10 years old, who had fear in her eyes, really desperate. And I'm not exaggerating the detail. She had a familiar face though. Must have been one of the kids that played around this building. She must have seen me walking my dog around, because as soon as she recognized me, or my dog, she caught eyes with me and whispered, "Help," with her lips. After this, I turned my head around, and the creeper's watching me now. I'd like to say he had the usual creepy smile, but he didn't. He was just wearing a very serious face with dead eyes. I don't know what to do. I'm 6'2", and kind of imposing, but I've never fought anyone, and I'm generally just a peaceful guy. In a fraction of a second, this guy looks up and says, "Calm down, sweetie. We need to get home before the food will get cold." Yeah, 10 out of 10. Totally believable, mate. "Who are you and what are you doing here?" I ask. "I'm her uncle. I need to get her home to eat," he says with the most serious look on her face. I was thinking what to answer to use as an excuse to bring her down and get her to safety, and being the sarcastic, bitchy type in this situation, I say, "That's strange, because I'm her uncle. This doesn't add up." At this point, the little girl has the brilliance to lean off and says, "Hey uncle, can you help me get home? Mummy will be worried." Now this guy didn't seem too threatening at the time, just kind of creepy. So I go onto the building and take the little girl, and as I prepare to grab Maya, she first growls at him and then barks. Now she usually barks this really high-pitched bark, but this time with this guy it was really low-pitched and even scared me. To that I turn around to see this guy with a hand behind his back, reaching for something. Oh crap, I think. I'm not a good fighter, and if this guy had a knife, it's going to end badly. He stops his reaching motion as the bark is now continuous, and in the heat of the moment the little girl leaned off, and I grabbed her with one arm, the other one keeping Maya at bay as a deterrent, and while she was descending I asked her if she had a phone. "No, I don't." I could tell she was on the brink of tears. As soon as she touched the ground I unlocked my phone and gave it to her. She took the phone and immediately legged it. I should have been glad to, but my immediate thought was, if she did this all to steal my phone I would have been deadly pissed. After all, it wouldn't have been unusual, but I basically asked her to take it, so it wouldn't have been impossible to think. Anyway, the girl was gone. I turn around and this dude has a knife out. Not a pocket knife. One of those huge kitchen knives that you used to cut bakery bread with. And me being so careless in the kitchen, I know how damn sharp those things can be. So I decide to run away too, but Maya decided nope, I wanted to stand here barking at him. And I couldn't manage to pull her away, as she's almost a 30-kilogram dog. But this was a grip too strong for even her. So we were there stalling and this guy starts swinging the knife in the air. I want to run. If I leave the dog, I know she'll end up really bad. And even if I manage to pull her, he could run after us. And there we were, him swinging the knife with empty eyes and my dog barking, and me crapping myself not knowing what to do. And to make everything worse, my hands were freezing cold for not wearing gloves, and the grip leash was really starting to hurt. The thing that still surprised me in the situation is the fact that I am absolutely sure that people around the block could hear us. Not a single one decided to take a look. Anyway, after what seemed like a long time but was probably about 2 minutes, I hear heavy footsteps from the street I came from, and a lot of people show up, probably her dad and some of her relatives and friends with a baseball bat. This is not going to end well, I thought. As soon as the creepy guy saw those men, he threw the knife in my direction, with terrible aim, but still I had to move not to get hit, and started to run to me, trying to go into the street in my direction. I didn't even try to block him because I was still frozen by the knife undertow, but Maya bit his leg, ripping a piece of his tracksuit off. I still have it. She's so proud of it, and is now one of her favorite toys. But the dude didn't even care and ran for his life, with some of the girl's supposed relatives behind him. He eventually managed to get them off, but the girl's father came to me. I thought to thank me, but instead he screamed, "Who the hell was that?" while waving his bat menacingly. I looked at the girl, telling him to calm down, but he only got more pissed until the girl ran up to him, telling him that I had helped her, and gave me my phone back. After that he calmed down and thanked me for helping his girl, and offered me to grab a coffee at his house. I politely refused and went home, deciding that was enough adventures for one night, and I was still tired as hell from uni, and slept it off. The next morning the police rang my doorbell to take my statement, as the guy managed to run off and showed me a book with all the signaled photos, ID and stuff, but nothing came out of it. He probably wasn't even from a nearby town. You could tell from his dialect and accent. It has a slight variation from town to town, and that was the end of it. I surely did not do the best I could have, but I'm glad I still got to help out the little girl. I don't know what would have happened to her if someone hadn't have shown up. So creepy wannabe uncle? Let's not meet. This starts off with an unfortunate incident that I don't really like to admit, but when I was in 7th grade, I had my first and only hookup. Nothing major happened, but it was enough to make me realize that I didn't want to be involved in that kind of thing, and was a pretty huge prude from that point on. The guy this involves, his friend and my friend and I, had all grown up in the same neighborhood, but I had moved to a different neighborhood a few years before, and didn't know the guys as well as she did. I'm hanging out with a friend called Kate at her house, and she says, "Let's hang out with Caleb and Luke." I agree. We go to Luke's house where Caleb was also hanging out. We get there and there's nothing weird at first, and Kate goes, "Hey, so Caleb thinks you're really cute." At this point in my life, where I was very desperate for the approval of others, I was not popular and not many guys had ever been interested in me, so I was very excited about this. Caleb was on the varsity football team which I was cheerleader for, and he was also admittedly attractive. I couldn't believe he was interested in me, and it clouded my already 13-year-old level judgment. We all go upstairs, and this is where things get weird. The guys literally started putting on some explicit content and watched it in front of us, like literal DVDs. I was weirded out, but again I had no experience with guys, and it didn't bother me as much as it should have. I was desperate to prove to this guy that I was cool, so I said nothing. After a few minutes, someone suggested that we play 7 Minutes in Heaven, and of course, I got paired up with Caleb. Kate knew my bad luck with guys, and I think she had good intentions, but this was definitely not the right way to go about things. So we go into the bathroom and small things happen. By normal people's standards, I guess. Then we come out. I was very naive and knew nothing about anything sexual. It was a rude awakening and I wanted no part of it again. We didn't stay long after that. Nothing ever developed further between Caleb and I was glad. Fast forward to sophomore year of high school, I had completely forgotten about him. I was a totally different person at this point. Super goth, career-oriented, as a budding opera singer, and very anti-relationship because I saw it as distracting from my goals. That day with Caleb had some very negative lasting feelings on me where sex was concerned, and I had become very afraid of it and ultra-protective of my virginity and innocence. I was not prepared for what I encountered that day. and it messed me up to a point where I couldn't even say the word sex aloud until I was married and pregnant with my first child. I'm 16 at this point, chilling in my room, when I suddenly get this mysterious text from an unknown number. It read, "Hey, sexy." I asked who it was, and he said, "I'll give you a hint. We had sex." I informed him that was impossible because I was a virgin, so he must have the wrong number. He says, "Well, we almost did." I again said that I'd never had almost sex with anyone. As naive as I was when I was 13, I would have never let it go that far. So he finally says, "It's Caleb, don't you remember me? We hooked up." And the memories came flooding back, and started saying some really gross things that were really triggering. Now I admit, I was on a bit of a high horse about my modesty, because I would not be taken advantage of again, and was proud to have my priorities straight. I lost my temper and told him, "How dare you think that I do anything with you? Leave me alone," and a few other choice words I sort of regret, which didn't go well. He lost it and started screaming over text about how stuck up I was, and then the kicker was, "Whatever, I know where you live. I'll come and end you if I want." I freak out and immediately call my dad crying. He came home from work and we called the police. They went and spoke to him, but ultimately did nothing. I got lucky in the fact that it scared him off, and I haven't heard from him since. Our school was enormous, so we never saw each other either, but it could have just angered him more, and something truly terrible may have happened. But yeah, to the slimy kid who thought it was okay to ask for a hookup 3 years after, please, what's wrong with you? This incident happened in the summer of 2015. I lived by myself in a nice house in a small town. Low crime, but still the occasional shady person. Anyway, at work one day on a smoke break, I watched a dog get thrown from a moving vehicle. 4-lane city traffic during the start of rush hour. I ran out of there, scooped him up and booked it back to my workplace. He was miraculously not injured. As a bleeding heart animal lover, I decided to take him home with me, until I could figure out what to do with him. I have a large amount of cats, and always have done. This was my first experience with a dog that I was solely responsible for. This guy was very shy, head hung, tail tucked, jumpy, just looking at me like I was about to beat him. I was clueless on the subject of dog personalities and tendencies. I just knew that they needed to be taken out frequently. His first night with me, we had been out about 15 times, as I did not want him pooing in my house. I was having my final cigarette of the day on my porch around 10:30. The dog was on a lead, chilling under my chair as I smoked and poked about on Reddit, when I see a man walking on the sidewalk that runs by my house. He keeps glancing up at me before passing. Shortly after he passes my house, he stopped, turned on his heels and approached. "Hey, can you tell me where 302 Church Street is?" I told him I'd searched the address on my phone, which of course was taking a minute to pop up. He explained he didn't have a phone of his own and was attempting to get to a friend's house, taking small steps towards me the whole time. Finally, the address I summoned came up. "It's exactly 2 blocks north of here, right on the southwest corner and across the street," I told him, pointing in the direction. He kept his eyes locked on me, continuing to slowly move closer. That's when the dog starts growling very softly at that point. I'd almost forgotten he was there. "Mind if I look at that map?" He grinned sheepishly. "Bad with directions, you know." I rose from my seat, pointing again. "It's truly just 2 blocks up the road. Just follow it. 2 blocks. The house will be on your left," making it very clear I wasn't going to hand him my phone. "Well, could I call him? Need to let him know I'm coming, ain't I?" he said, creeping closer still, extending his hand. "No." "How about text him?" "Dude, no." Start making my way towards my door. Just let me see your phone." He was visibly becoming pissed off, clearly trying to contain it and getting way too close to my porch. As a last-ditch effort of getting this dude to leave, I say, "You need to get off my yard. My dog is protective, and he'll mess you up. Hell, I didn't know anything about this dog, let alone whether he had the capability to mess someone up. I just hoped saying it would intimidate the guy. Like I had said the magic word, the pup sprang into action. Like a la the wolf creature, from the never-ending story he emerges like a bullet from under the chair, growling, snarling, and barking his little butt off. He jerks me, damn near off the porch trying to get this guy. He sounded and acted like an 80-pound dog, not a 40-pound timid beagle mix. I was afraid. I didn't know if the pup would turn on me. As stated previously, at the time I knew absolutely nothing about dogs. He backed his hindquarters into my legs, almost nudging me to the door, still carrying on, eyes locked on the dude and baring his teeth. The dude held up his hands and backed off, stammered something like, 2 blocks north, yeah? And began walking that way. I go in, cut my lights off and peek out the window. He glances at the house. Assured I'm inside, he turns and begins to walk in a completely opposite direction. Icing on the cake, he pulls out a poem from his pocket, raises it to his ear, and makes a call. The dog secured his place as a member of my family that night. He is incredibly protective of me, and has frightened away another creeper since this incident. He is attached to my hip, and has made it known that he is grateful to be in a safe and loving home, wherein he will never be again a projectile from a moving vehicle. His name is Hank, and I truly believe that night would have ended very poorly for me had he not been there.
When we are young, preteen and teenage girls, we believe that a prince will come and sweep us off our feet. It's not until we're a bit older that we realize how many creeps use that against us. I had just turned 14 when we finally moved from Texas to Indiana. We moved into this big 3-bedroom house with 3 trailers behind it. In one of those trailers was a guy that would often talk to me. I thought it was cool to have an older man like me. He asked me to be his girlfriend and I accepted. My dad noticed him giving me attention and grounded me from going outside. He got a letter to me, asking me to meet him at the parking lot at midnight. My dumb butt did. When I got there, he had some popcorn and soda for me. My next memory is laying on the merry-go-round with him and another man standing over me. I tried to get up but blacked out again. My next memory is the back of his car driving violently through a cornfield, and my next memory is waking up in my bed with no memory of how I got there. I got up while my dad was at work and went to ask him what happened, but he had packed up and left. Years later, as I was driving down a road that was near the old house when I was passing a cornfield, all of a sudden a memory of that night popped into my head. I remember walking up in that cornfield all alone at midnight. I somehow made it home and got back to bed. I don't know why I couldn't remember this before. Those guys thought I had died and panicked. They drove me to the cornfield and put me out there. It took me years before I realized how close I came to death. So if you lived in a trailer behind a house in Whiteland, Indiana in 1989, I hope you've never hurt any other kids.
Here is some backstory. I live in a small town pretty far away from the main city, but it's still a part of it. I live in Karachi, Pakistan. Right next to my town is a rural area with farmhouses and animals and breeding places. In this rural area, a friend of mine owns a farm with a good amount of ammunition, which is very rare in Pakistan because of gun laws. But the friend happened to be from a gun-dealing family. They were staying at the farm that night, and it was only me, my friend, and a helper there. His cousin was usually there, as the cousin owns the farm, but he was off doing some work that night. Me and my friend were on the rooftop smoking cigarettes and drinking some beer when I noticed a large semi-truck approaching down the highway into the rural area. It came down the road, and just when it was about to make the turn to go onto the farm road, the headlights went off. That's when we knew it wasn't a friendly truck. My friend made a dash outside carrying a 9mm pistol, which was usually enough to scare people off. But just to be sure, I stood on the rooftop with an assault rifle. Our goal was to only scare these people off and not do anything stupid. Now, my friend made a big mistake, standing outside the farm, and some people shot rounds straight at him. As you can imagine, we were petrified. My friend ran to the other side of the road in a panic, no clue what he was going to do, and I shot a whole clip into the air trying to scare off these guys, basically saying we have larger guns as well. It seemed to work, as the guys left straight away, and my friend came up and we sat and smoked more, thinking about what we should have done. We were considering going to the police when the guard dogs began barking like crazy. These were well-behaved dogs that would not bark for any reason, and they seemed to be barking at cattle. I ordered them to quiet down, which they normally would do right away as they obeyed me, as I had trained them, but they didn't seem to budge. They kept on barking and biting the cattle. When the helper let out a scream, it was immediately hushed out. I actually thought that the helper was shot dead or something. I was scared out of my mind, so was my friend. I made my way down to find the helper lying on the floor with his head busted open. That's when I noticed the farm door swung wide open. One of the guys, or the robbers, had snuck into the farm and hidden among the cattle, looking for the perfect opportunity to open the farm door. I looked up to see my friend with horror in his eyes. The truck was approaching again. I'm pretty sure I almost crapped myself this time, knowing full well that we were not only about to get robbed, but probably killed too. I untied the dogs immediately, thinking they would provide at least a bit of help. My friend tossed me the 9mm, and I stood there shaking, waiting for a possible shootout death. That's when the luckiest thing I've ever seen happened. The police had been reporting shots fired, and they made their way to the rural area. It was rural, so it took them quite a while, but their timing was amazing. The red and blue lights possibly scared the robbers away, but they were like angels sent from heaven for us. We told the cops everything that happened, and the cops offered to stay with us for the night. We accepted it, and told the neighboring farms about the lurking threat as well. Thankfully, nothing like that ever happened again. This story happened to me and my girlfriend, now fiancé. To give you some context, she and I met online in 2015 and fell in love. We communicated via Skype for 3 years because we lived in separate countries, until I came to live with her in February of 2018. So a few weeks or so before I flew to meet her, she had made friends with a group of guys in our hometown, and I got to meet them shortly after living with her. They ranged in age from 16 to 18 and would come to visit us often because we lived close to the high school they attended. At first, I found it a bit weird that they would always come over and take up so much of our time, but they turned out to be really good friends over time. One of them even agreed to be one of my groomsmen recently. But back then, there was always one in particular that bugged me. Dan. As I mentioned earlier, the guys would come and visit and hang out with us a lot, but Dan was the one that would always take up most of our time. I say this in the sense that he would message us early, almost every day, asking if we were home and if he could come over, and would proceed to spend the entire day from morning to night, or early afternoon to night, depending on his work schedule, at our place. He would also go out of his way to meet us and bump into us wherever we went, whether it would be the store, the coffee shop, or any other place you can think of. While I found this annoying, there wasn't anything particularly creepy or weird going on yet. Mind you, we live in a small town where it's almost impossible to not run into someone you know on the way to buy groceries or something. Plus, I had only known him for as long as my fiancé had known him, which wasn't a very long time, so I thought. I was maybe judging him too harshly. Also, he was in a long-distance relationship himself with a girl from another country who he was hoping to meet in real life, just like me. So I could at least relate to him in that aspect, and decided to let it slide, but made a note to keep an eye out for him for any suspicious behavior. The problem seemed to start once he started trying to incorporate himself into other aspects of our life. He would make friends with anyone we'd been friends with for a long time, tag along with us whenever we were going to meet up with said friends, even though he hadn't been invited, hang out with them without us knowing, etc. And my favourite instance, and the one that made me become more suspicious with him, was one time when we were going to hang out with some long-time friends of my fiancée. As the friend had finished her shift, and we were getting ready to get into her car to drive over to her place, Dan suddenly shows up and joins us to their place uninvited. It was just so off-putting that he would just invite himself without our friends or even our consent. Then, when we were done there and walking home, the three of us passed his house. We lived further away at the time and assumed he'd go home, but nope. He kept tagging along with us with the excuse that he needed to buy something at the store, which was bull, since the stores had all been closed for well over an hour at this point, and he knew it. So he just kept walking with us until at one point, when we were almost home, we put our foot down and told him that we were tired and just wanted to go to sleep as soon as we got home, and told him to go home. It took us nearly 10 minutes, and 10 minutes can be quite a long time to just convince him, during which he would react to our request with awkward and creepy silences, until he finally headed home annoyed. My fiancée, concerned that she'd offended him, asked if he wanted to hang out with us later in the week. What follows was various weeks of him coming over to our place, staying until late at night, and him slowly leaving more and more of his stuff at our place so we'd have an excuse to come over. I kid you not. He brought over his PS3 with a bag of 30 or so games which stayed there for 3 months. It got to the point where people thought he'd moved in with us. He also seemed to have problems with our friends. Amongst other things, he would get into arguments with our friends and told one friend who was goofing around at our place that he'd kill him if he didn't shut up. He lied to us and made us believe that 2 good friends of ours wanted to report us to the police for drugging our friends. I mentioned earlier that some of them were 16 at the time, and he allegedly hit one of our friends' girlfriends once, although this was never confirmed, but I have no reason to believe it was a lie. It's like he wanted us all to himself, and to isolate us from our friends. The last thing he did, which ended up being the key to us getting rid of him forever, was that he started dating my fiancé's cousin, MJ. He broke up with his long-distance girlfriend under suspicious circumstances and started dating her. As a result, whenever MJ came to visit, Dan would always come along too. My fiancé wanted to hang out with MJ. There was Dan, even when he was dating someone else. His obsession with us never ended. One day when we were in town, we met another friend of ours, and Dan insisted that we hang out with the guy all day when we'd arranged to do something else. When we refused, he and MJ ditched us to be with him, and that was when we'd had enough. We got into a huge fight later that day in the park, with some of our friends as witnesses, and told him off, telling him we wanted nothing more to do with him anymore, and to pack up his stuff and never show his face at our place again. This unfortunately resulted in my fiancé and MJ not talking to each other for a long time. We had to move a few times since then, the most recent being February of last year, and we never saw him again and blocked him on all our social media and blocked him out of our lives. We know from friends that he tried a few times to ask around where we live, but our friends always have our backs. MJ and my fiancé recently made up after she dumped him, and now that the sour taste he left behind is for the most part gone, it goes without saying that we never want to see him again. Just such a toxic person. Have you ever been followed? I mean, properly followed. A lot of people don't appreciate just how sinister it truly is to experience this. To look behind you to know that someone is right there watching your every move, waiting for who knows what opportunity to strike. I'll take you back 2 years. I went to the store late at night at around 9 or 10 due to my job. I appreciate it isn't that safe, but I do carry a taser and pepper spray with me for things like this. I should probably mention that I'm quite petite, only about 5 foot tall, and the dude in question is at least 6 foot and twice my size. But this started a while ago, perhaps a year before. You see, a man walked up to me while I was in the self-checkout and started asking me your typical questions. And then, your not-so-typical questions. If I had a boyfriend and such. Telling me he noticed me walking around and needed to tell me I was pretty. Things like that. I lied and said I had a boyfriend just for my own safety, and took the compliment. I didn't think anything weird of it, until it happened again, and again, and again. Every time he used the exact same script, the exact same order, and always found me in very closed-off spaces. The first 3 times, he'd never even had anything to buy. The second time, I was on the floor of the makeup aisle, very vulnerable. He said the same thing again, and I politely told him I did have a boyfriend, but thank you. I thought it was a mere coincidence. The third time it happened, I was in the very corner of the store by the vegetables, with nobody near me. He says the exact same thing as the first 2 times, and I finally had to tell him. Every time you come up to me, you've always asked me the same thing, and I've always told you no. I need you to leave me alone and never come see me again. The 4th time it happened, we passed each other, and he realized it was me, so he circled around and followed me to the medicine aisle. I pretended to look at bottles. Every time I took a step to the side, he would too. At that point, as soon as I saw him, I called up a friend, so I would have someone that could hear what was happening, and tried to scare him off. I turned the corner, and I could hear him calling out for me, so I started walking faster. Believe it or not, I ended up running into a police officer in uniform, and even though he was busy and I felt bad for interrupting, I asked him for help. The officer walked me to self-checkout, and the man actually had the nerve to pick the counter right next to me. The officer walked me out to my car, and I could see the guy watching me in the parking lot, probably seeing which one was my car. The last interaction happened a little while ago. I was looking for something for dinner, and walked out of the frozen food section across the makeup. Guess who walked past me at the same time? We crossed paths and I kept walking and checked over my shoulder. He was observing me. I freaked out and hid in the makeup aisle and poked my head out, and sure enough he was looking up and down the aisle to see where I went. I messaged my mum and a friend solely because I didn't know what to do. When I saw him turn, I went to find the manager, but I could hear his keys following behind me. The manager walked me to the checkout, and once again he picked the counter next to mine. The manager walked me out and he trailed behind me and watched me enter my car. I did a few circles to make sure no one was following me and drove home. Am I being stupid and overreacting? It's the 5th time it's happened now, and after the 3rd I reported him to a different manager, and he told me if he's ever in the store again he'll be removed or banned. But they weren't there tonight. Where do I go from here? The officer that helped me even told me that unfortunately he couldn't do anything else than walk me out. I know I shouldn't go in so late, but it's the only time I can. I know the guy's being creepy on purpose. I just wish he didn't have to. I like to do work around homes in my spare time. I found a guy in the gigs section who was doing some renovations on a duplex and was looking for an extra hand. He knew electrical. I was good with carpentry. Perfect. Pick up some extra cash and skills working a few nights. We send a few texts and he stops over to meet me. Nice enough guy, and we planned to get started. I would usually take the bus around the city, but my mum and sister were in town, so they gave me a lift. Don't end up locked in a basement, my sister jokes, as I hop out. He offers a beer while he breaks down the project, and from what I can tell, he's doing a nice job. We talk about the work in general for a bit, and kick back with another beer, maybe 2. Time's passing, and he's supposed to be paying me for my time, so I find it a little odd. But heck, it's how I would work on my house too, so power to you. Beers are cold, keep 'em coming. After 4 or 5, we finally get moving and do a few odd jobs that take all of half hour, and he's debating how far he wants to take it tonight. We have a beer while we think about it. I'm thinking of calling it a night. Another beer and a cigarette? I'll show you the rest of what I've been working on, he says. Works for me, as I follow him up from the table. I've lost count of how many India Pale Ale beers I've put back at this point, but my vision says I'm in the 10 to 12 range. He holds open the door and tells me to head down in front of him into the basement. Not until this very moment have I thought twice about the course of the night, but that one word brought it all rushing back into perspective. I'm on high alert, but he hasn't done anything egregious, so I finish the cigarette and pray that I don't take a wrench to the head on my way back up. Safe back at the table. So, do you miss your girlfriend? Yeah, she's in Jersey, so it's tough seeing her. Do you miss her sexually? The heck, man. Bells are ringing. It's 1 in the morning. He changes the subject, but the mood has shifted. Sensing this, he decides to go for broke. What follows is a stream of things that shall not be repeated, beginning with an innuendo and easing not so gracefully into the explicit. I'm legitimately afraid now when my brain is firing. 1, don't freak him out. At least I'm bigger. 2, who the hell does this? 3, do I really have nice legs? 4, I hope that there wasn't anything in those drinks. 5, if he pays me now, is this considered prostitution? You got the wrong sort of Craigslist section, buddy, is what I came out with in the end. He actually paid me, and I ran the 4 miles home, stopping only for Chinese food for some reason. I was drunk, had money to burn, and figured this decision couldn't be much worse than the last.
I am a 27-year-old female-bodied person. A few months ago, my sister and I wanted to take a late-night trip to our local Kroger for a snack. This was before she moved out, and God do I miss having her in my life. But anyway, as we pulled into the parking lot, there's this beat-up old truck with an older man just sitting there. He looked like he was between 50 and 70. It was hard to tell in the dark, but as I saw him, I got a weird feeling about him. We parked a few feet away and just went on with our business. So we get inside the grocery store, grab what we need, and I got myself and my sister a snack. And I got myself a snack, and my sister got a bottle of wine to share with my mum as I don't drink. Nothing odd happened in the store until we leave. I noticed that the old pickup truck was now parked next to our Jeep, and I thought it was very odd for the old man to just be parked there when he had several other parking spaces to be. Immediately I get a feeling of dread, as I was a victim of sexual abuse and am typically uncomfortable around older men I don't know. As soon as my sister and I get to the car, the old man steps outside of his vehicle and places his hands on the passenger side door where I would have entered. "Need me to open the door for you, young lady?" he asked in a creepy voice with a smile on his face. No, I think I can get it by myself, thanks. Would you take your hand off the door, please? I'm on the edge, as the look in this guy's eyes spelled nothing but problems. Thankfully, my sister caught wind of my discomfort and slowly began to pull the wine bottle out of her bag. What happened next made me want to crawl out my skin. The old man obliges and takes his hand off the door for a second to place his hand around my waist. I froze and looked at him like, "Are you serious?" And I felt him pull at me ever so slightly. That's when I heard my sister turn the ignition on, and I got in the car as fast as I could, slamming the door shut in the guy's face. My sister then stepped on the gas and peeled out the parking lot, not even giving the guy a chance to look at me. She told me she wondered why it took me so long to get in, but when she realized what was happening, she was going to bash the guy over the head with her wine if it went any further. I then had a mini panic attack on the way back home, and my dad of course dismissed my feelings and brushed them off as I told him. As did my mum, unfortunately. I did manage to calm down in the end, and now I asked my sister to park a little closer to the entrance to the stores, where there are a lot of lights, in case anything like this ever happens again.
My whole life, my mum was single, and tried hard with the best of intentions to find me a suitable father figure. My own father is a homeless drug addict, who was out of my life long before this. I was about 10 at the time, and we were visiting a friend of hers who had kids that I got along well with. Her friend was always trying to hook up my mum, also with good intentions. We had been visiting all day and it was getting late, and I was tired and ready to go home. I go through the house and find my mum on the patio talking with the guy she was to be hooked up with that night. As I stepped out onto the patio and set eyes on him, I was immediately stricken with a deep-seated feeling of dread and wanted nothing more than to get my mum away from him as fast as possible. In fact, looking back at his face, he almost seemed evil in a way I cannot explain. As this hit me, I tried to stay calm, and I asked my mum to come inside so that I could speak with her. She came inside and I told her I wanted to leave as soon as possible, sensing that I was feeling distressed for some reason, and being the great mum who always listens to me in situations like this, she said okay, and soon after we left. As soon as we were on the road, I told my mum exactly how I felt, and that I didn't want her to ever see or speak to him again. Once again, not wanting to upset me, she said okay, and didn't speak to him again. Maybe 6 months later, my mum's friend calls to gossip, as they frequently did, and she tells my mum that the same man from the night was now in prison. He had gotten together with a woman who had 2 kids, and one night he ended up locking the kids in a closet in the same room, and he had their mum tied to a bed and repeatedly raped her. My mum was sitting on the floor of the living room reading the newspaper, as she usually did while on the phone with her friend, and I was on the couch next to her watching TV. And I will never forget the look she gave me as she told me this news. Let me take you back to winter 3 years ago, and a college friend of my father's reached out to ask how we've been, and if we would like to go skiing with her family. They told us that we could live in their secondary apartment and eat with them, which meant that a holiday would have been much more affordable, so we just went for it. When we arrived to her village, my dad's creepy school friend seemed to have changed plans. She didn't bring her family and just joined us to get to the village where we all needed to go skiing, but just for grocery shopping. The day was very nice. My father and I had fun, tried to beat our speed records which we recorded, ate fast food in a restaurant, and at about 5, went back to the house and ate dinner with her and her child. I really liked her child and thought we could become friends. After dinner, she showed us the apartment where we would sleep. As soon as we entered, we noticed that the humidity inside the apartment was very high. It felt like we'd just entered the tropics, just hot and wet and smelled. Not particularly bad, but like they'd used tons of cleaning supplies and chemicals. Also, she warned us not to touch any of the big carton boxes in the bathroom, as she was doing some experiments, but what she was doing was never mentioned. While searching for duvet covers and blankets, we also discovered a small door. Behind it we just saw darkness and didn't know where it led, but it was late and we wanted to sleep, so we didn't inspect the shaft or whatever it was. I read something and tried to sleep, but I couldn't. I had the feeling that something was off, but I shrugged it off, thinking I saw too many horror stories. And after an hour, I noticed my dad couldn't sleep either, just tossing and turning. I told him, and I can quote and translate word for word, I just got a weird feeling. Something's off here, but I kind of feel dumb for being scared. My dad answered, yeah, I got a weird feeling too, but I also just shrugged it off. We talked a bit about the insulation and feeling, and that they shouldn't be ignored, and it was at that point that we decided to get the hell out of there. A few days later, a female in that area was arrested for murdering her husband, and even though I can't 100% confirm that she was the woman arrested, I'd like to think it probably was. Some time passed, and I asked my dad about it a while later. He told me that the creepy school friend was arrested not for murder, but actually dealing drugs. At the apartment, she was growing some sort of drugs that had to be grown at a certain temperature. So that made sense, and the smell of cleaning supplies was easy to explain. She wanted to ensure that we couldn't smell anything. It's good to know that we weren't in a life-threatening situation, but nonetheless, it really gave me the willies being there. This happened around 2 years ago. I work at a store of a big fast food chain to pay for my university. Our staff changes frequently because a lot of students and migrants work at our place, so you don't get to know each other very well. Everyone has their own social life, and it's very, very rare for co-workers to establish friendships outside working hours. Still, you know the people on your shift, and the night shift has particularly few workers. One of my co-workers, Jasir, started to get interested in me. Not that I noticed. I'm young and dumb, like being friendly, and, important for later, have a hard time saying no. In December of 2019, our store threw a Christmas party at a pub. I went and had a great time, but I also made plans later for that night. Because of that, I wanted to leave early, which made Jasir also want to leave early despite the fact he neither needed nor planned it beforehand, which made me feel uncomfortable. Unfortunately, he didn't know how to get to the train station and I did, so I couldn't say no and just allowed him to tag along. When we arrived at the train station, it came to light, when there was no train he could take to get home. None. He did not check beforehand. He did not ask me. He just wanted to tag along with me. It was quite uncomfortable. Instead of taking the train to the main station, he got into my train and only out. When I insisted, he changed trains at another big station. But oh boy, that was not the train of the title. But oh boy. In January of 2020, Jasir asked me out for a coffee and I agreed. I thought, he just wants friends. He doesn't have any of his own, and it'd be nice to make friends with co-workers from his point of view. If anything happens, I can just leave. And so I went. First it was okay-ish, we mostly talked about work-related stuff because we didn't share any hobbies. We are not even the same age, nor have the same mother tongue. Jasir didn't like talking about work or much else really. He started talking about how different I was from the other co-workers, how nice of a person I am, and how good my charisma was. Then he asked me if we could get to know each other better. I genuinely didn't want to, and still didn't. Jasir is not my type. Neither as a person nor from his looks, especially his looks, even if I sound superficial. While I am in my early 20s, Jasir is at least in his early 30s, and I have no problem with age. Instead of telling Jasir a straight no, I told him I wasn't interested in having a boyfriend. He didn't take it that seriously and told me that I would change my mind. I told him I wouldn't. He, again, was not really on board with that opinion, so I elaborated my opinion 3 times in German and 1 time in English to get it very clear. He always changed to English if he didn't understand something, or if he misunderstood, even if he heard it clearly and just didn't like it. I mean, obviously my opinion is going to change if I explain in English rather than German. We let the conversation die, with him not being convinced. He quit soon after, and I foolishly assumed I was free. But whenever he came to my workplace to place an order, he would ask me out to eat something. And every time I would postpone, with whatever I said the time before. Because of finals, because of travel, because of anything I could get my hands on. Then COVID-19 hit Germany in March, and I didn't see him anymore. I blocked him on all social media in April and hoped that would be the end of it. Today I finished my shift at 3 AM and left with my female and very Asian co-worker Wei to catch the next train. We take different trains, so we decided to wait at the main lobby until I needed to go to my platform. In that time, Jasir appeared. He just finished his shift and was on his way home. Wei asked him which train he needed to get, and he said he was walking home. While the conversation went on, I got closer to Wei to get some space between me and Jasir. Wei did not grasp how uncomfortable I was. She just walked away. What did Jasir do? He placed himself between me and Wei, right in my line of vision, and every fibre in my body felt how he barged into my personal space. I decided I could not take a private conversation with him and said, "Oh look, I need to get to my platform." I did this to end it, but Jasir followed me. Through the main lobby, through the train station, into the elevator and into the train. I was internally screaming and walked through the train until I saw another passenger. I sat down in the rows of seats next to me and Jasir followed. As if every bit of luck had just left me, the other passenger moved seats and went away, so I was back alone. Jasir spoke and spoke, and I showed clear signs of not wanting to continue the conversation. I hoped he would leave before the train departed, but he didn't. Mind you, the train goes in the opposite direction of his house, and it's an hour walking distance from my workplace. There's no way in hell this man could get anything out of taking the train except to follow me, just to keep talking to me and not with me. I was freaked out and told him in English he was actually being very weird. Maybe I should have used a different word, but English isn't my first language, and at that point I only thought about escaping. I could not let him see my station, or he could easily find out where I lived. I didn't live very rural, but at 3 AM there's no one on the streets, so following me home would have been relatively easy. I decided to get up at the next station, let him get out the train first, and then just stay inside as the doors closed. Fortunately it worked, but only after telling him clearly this was not my station. I would not get out, and he would not get back in. I even held my hand out to stop him from going back. He stayed outside after the conductor shouted at us to let us close the door. So let's rewind. He's older than me, but does not get the concept of me not wanting to be in a relationship with him, and whenever he doesn't like the answer, he just tries to speak in English because he thinks it's a miscommunication. He followed me twice into my train and almost to my house, without even thinking about just how creepy that is. Jasir, sincerely, let's never meet again. In the summer of 2015, I was 33 years old, broke and jobless in Mexico City. My entire life had gone steadily down the drain for the past few years, and my best friend had moved back to Europe. I was tired and bored, so when an online friend I had met in person 2 years before invited me to spend a month in his farmhouse in Norway, I accepted without hesitation. The deal was simple. In exchange for some work at the farm, I would get some pretty sweet holidays in a country I had always wanted to visit. I have no problem doing labor work. In fact, I was always looking forward to do it and to get my body into real action. Since I had moved back to Mexico City from Canada in 2011, I had been feeling rusted and soft, so I packed my suitcase, put on my boots, and said goodbye to Mexico City the best way I knew how, by getting absolutely pissed drunk. I arrived to Stavanger in Norway, but my suitcase decided to go to Thailand instead. I think it got the better deal. So after an hour filling the reports in and giving the address of my friend's house, I was able to walk out and meet him again. My friend Harold was standing there confused and annoyed. He told me later he was about to leave the airport thinking I had decided to not take the flight after all. Guess I was lucky. That night, I spent it with Harold and his friends in an oceanfront apartment in a quiet neighborhood in Stavanger, getting drunk on Norwegian beer and smoking weed. The next day, Harold drove me all the way to his farmhouse about an hour south of Stavanger, in a community called Ergesund. At least, that's what I think it was called. Norwegian names and addresses were weird if you're not familiar with them. The land Harold owned was huge and beautiful. Not really sure how it all works, but in his property there's a lighthouse that attracts a lot of tourists from all over Europe. The house itself was located on top of a small hill, with a huge barn next to it. Harold lived alone in the 2-story house, but I was told the basement housed a tenant. As soon as I glanced the basement window, I got a strange feeling of dread. There was a webcam facing the driveway, and the rest of the window was covered by boxes and papers, but I decided not to mention it to Harold, since he didn't seem to care. I just assumed the guy was an eccentric man, or maybe a normal precaution considering we were more or less in the middle of nowhere, with no neighboring houses, just separated by big fields. I took my mind off things and focused on the joy of being in Norway. After being installed in one of the bedrooms upstairs, I was informed that that week, Harold's son's wedding was going to be celebrated, and thus the house would need to be filled with the bride's family from Bergen. I think, anyway. In general, it was great to meet them, but on my second night when everyone had gone to sleep, and Harold and I were still up chatting and drinking beer, I got to meet the tenant, Olaf. Harold had been having some trouble with his new smartphone, and apparently Olaf was tech-savvy, and had indeed been the one purchasing the phone for Harold. We went downstairs to his basement. Now Harold kept telling me that he didn't like Olaf, and was actually upset by the way Olaf kept the newly remodeled basement. From what I understood, they had some kind of relationship more than just landlord and tenant. The basement was dark, all the windows covered, and piles of junk cluttered the entire place. The bedroom was full of computer parts and electronic junk. He had blinking and beeping things everywhere, and he invited us to sit down. And when he turned on a desk lamp to check Harold's phone, I got the first real good look of him. He was in his mid-40s but looked older. Shaved head, really skinny, big nose and deep shadows under his eyes. He had the entire look of a meth addict. I should know, since I worked in a recovery house in Surrey, British Columbia, Canada. I had seen the same face back then in the people who were dealing with severe addictions. The way he stuttered only confirmed further my observations, and I decided that I had to keep an eye on him. My gut told me right then and there he was trouble. Olaf finished with Harold's phone, and then directed his attention to me, and asked me if I would like to see some porn, to which I declined entirely. I just wanted to leave the dark and oppressive basement. Harold laughed a drunken laughter, and asked Olaf if he had gay porn, to which Olaf said he didn't care about the sexuality of the videos. He simply liked to see people getting things introduced to them. When he said that, I got chills running down my spine, and I asked myself if he meant in a sexual way, or if there was a more ominous meaning to it. But we didn't stay to find out. Harold had a busy day, and the next day I was tired and thoroughly creeped out by him. When we were backing the house, I asked Harold if he trusted his friend, to which he replied that Olaf wasn't his friend. He was just an addict renting the basement. The government paid Harold to rent, and a nurse visited him twice a week to bring him his medication. After dropping that bomb, he said goodnight and went to his bedroom. I tried not to think about Olaf, but between my gut feeling and him popping into the house unannounced when everyone else was preparing for the wedding that weekend, I couldn't really relax. The first time he went inside was to give me a flash drive with movies he had downloaded for me from the internet. He made sure to emphasize that it was illegal. The second time, he seemed high and wanted to simply let me know that if I needed anything I could ask him, but asked me to not tell Harold about him going up. He said that, and then walked out very slowly and carefully, as if he knew he would fall if he rushed. When the wedding was over and the house was again empty, except for Harold and I, the encounters with Olaf became stranger and more often. One time, while I was in the kitchen fixing myself some breakfast, I turned around to find Olaf standing on the kitchen door, bleeding from his nose, staring at me. I jumped out of my skin and dropped my breakfast, creating a huge mess, but he didn't seem to notice and simply started babbling incoherently, while directing his cloudy eyes to the ceiling on top of my head. I was petrified, trying to think of a train of actions that wouldn't trigger a violent response from him. He simply turned around and quietly walked out of the house. I started locking the door whenever I was alone in the house since that day. When I told Harold about it, he got visibly mad and went downstairs to talk and yell to Olaf. Harold told me he didn't like to have him in the basement, and he had tried to kick him out several times, but the government had always ruled against evicting him. And Harold's sister was mostly responsible for it. She felt bad for the guy and was 100% on Olaf's side just because he had the same number as her father. Go figure. So Harold had to learn to live with him in the basement, but only because Olaf was supposed to clean and in treatment for his addiction. After that day, Olaf stopped being friendly with me and just became a cold, impassive presence in my life there. There was one day when I was in the barn chatting with a couple of Harold's friends, when Olaf entered the barn to place his laptop and some homemade-looking gadget on the window. Despite no one asking, he began to explain to everyone that he was using it to hack into people's networks to get their Wi-Fi password. You know, like everyone does, right? He gave me a nasty glare, and then I stormed out. I turned to Harold's friends and told them I was completely afraid of him, and I had this feeling that he would attack me one day. Harold's friends told me that it would never happen, but that if I felt I was in real danger, I could give them a call and they would pick me up. We exchanged numbers, hugged, and said goodbye for the night. The next day, Things between Harold and me turned sour, mostly because I wasn't feeling safe anymore, and I had expressed my wish to instead go to Germany to visit the man who was now my husband. Apparently, Harold had hoped for us to go closer, but he had failed to let me know. In the end, I was exhausted, and I didn't want to deal with that anymore. I should mention that Harold has a severe alcohol problem that I wasn't aware of until the month I spent with him, seeing him get absolutely wasted on a daily basis. To some that might be attractive, but not me. So altogether the situation went from bad to worse, and I wanted out. I'd done my job, I'd done nothing wrong, and I wanted to be able to relax away from both of them. The night I decided to organize my flight to Germany from Norway, Harold went out to get drunk and didn't come back until the early hours of the morning the next day. I had tried to stay up and wait for him to talk, but I must have fallen asleep at some point. I woke up to the sound of the front door being closed, and I caught a glance of him walking towards the barn with the dog and a six-pack of beers through the living room window. I then tried to send him a message through Facebook, but soon discovered the internet was down. That's weird, I thought. In the whole time I had been there, the internet never failed, not even once. I went to the router and restarted it a few times to no avail, and decided to just let it be. Perhaps Harold had cut the internet as a way of a drunken, childish punishment. So I would just get on my morning routine and have breakfast before going to knock on the barn door. That would give him some time to blow off some steam, I thought. I went downstairs to the bathroom, got comfortably naked and jumped into the shower ready to refresh myself and sing a few songs to lift my spirits in preparation for the grim talk that awaited me with Harold. Halfway through the first song, I heard a loud bang coming from the front door, followed by someone screaming my name. I thought Harold must be very drunk and angry. I sighed while turning off the shower, thinking I was going to have a long argument, when the bathroom door slammed open. And that is when I saw, to my horror, Olaf coming at me with a completely deranged expression on his face, wielding a big cutter knife, the kind employees use in warehouses to open boxes. For a few seconds I didn't think or focus on anything other than the knife in his hand, and the fact that I was naked, wet, and cornered in a small bathroom in the middle of nowhere in Norway. I was paralyzed. My biggest fear was actually happening. I couldn't scream or move, I just stared at the knife. He kept pulling and pushing, making that now horrifying noise those blades do while operated. I was about to pass out when Olaf's screams brought me back to the gravity of the situation. He was yelling me, accusing me of playing Harold's feelings. He was calling me a liar, a filthy Mexican, and throwing in some threats about cutting me open and messing with me if I ever tried to take anything from Harold. That, I think, is what got my gears moving again. He called me a thief. I can be whatever, but I'm no thief and I'm not a liar. So standing there getting myself angry at the psycho in front of me threatening my life, my training from the recovery house in Canada kicked in. I remembered the rules from when dealing with altered addicts. Make eye contact, keep your hands down so that you don't startle them, and speak to them in a calm but dominant voice, and always, always, always refer to them by their name. And that is exactly what I did. Despite the fear and certainty of me being stabbed to death, I stared at him in his cloudy, crazy wide eyes and said, "Olaf, you are the thief. You're the one who keeps stealing Harold's silverware. Olaf, you are the one who keeps breaking into the house. Olaf, Harold is not your friend. Harold doesn't even want you living here." It was a long shot, but it worked. My words made him confused, and I was able to take one single small step forward, while making him take one small step back. Then he charged at me again with his rant, wielding the knife to my chest and neck. I could feel the cold sweat dripping on my back, and a burning void forming in my stomach every time he launched the knife forward. But I didn't flinch. I stood my ground and kept repeating the same words to him, every time gaining another step, pushing him little by little out of the bathroom. He might have noticed what I was doing, but by then it was too late. When he took the last steps out of the bathroom door frame, I moved as fast as my terrorized body would allow me to, slammed the door on his stupid, crooked nose and locked it, and immediately pushed against it with all my body while a storm of curses, punches and kicks rained on the little farmhouse door. I remember praying to a god I didn't really believe to hold the door in place and to keep the addict out. There was nothing that I could use in the bathroom to defend myself. Nothing against an infuriated high psychopath wielding a knife and a possibly broken nose. After what seemed to have been an eternity, I felt, at long last, a very strong kick to the door, and then to my relief he stormed out of the house, with a loud bang of the front door announcing his exit. However, I stayed put for another 20 minutes, not able to breathe or think anything else than keeping the door closed. I wanted to puke, but I couldn't move. Eventually my senses came back, and I knew I had to act quickly. I opened the door to the bathroom, flew upstairs, got dressed, and then exited the house through the window to the garden. I knew he could hear me moving on the first floor, and he had his stupid camera spying on the driveway. I jumped to the garden, jumped the fence, and ran around the house to the barn. I kicked and banged and screamed for Harold to let me in, but it was useless. He was living his drama, and I needed help. So I ran all the way to the next house where his sister lived, rang the bell, and when she opened I explained to her as best I could what happened. She didn't speak a word of English, so it was a comical exchange for about 10 minutes, until her expression shifted from confusion to absolute terror mirroring my own. She walked me up to the barn, opened the door, commanded Harold to guard me, and went straight to the basement to confront Olaf. I was shocked and shaking, still trying to explain to Harold what had just happened. His drunken state was gone by the time I was done. He too went to the basement, and I could hear the screams. They took him out. The sister and her husband got Olaf in the car and took him away. Harold stayed with me all day. I drank so much beer but didn't get drunk, even though I wanted to. I wanted to forget but simply couldn't. I was told that Olaf admitted to having the knife, and that his intentions were to make me fight him. So in reality he wanted an excuse to stab the Jesus out of my naked butt. After all, he liked to see people have things introduced to them, right? That night, I slept in the house while Harold kept guard of the house. I had some tools with me to defend myself, and of course I slept fully dressed. A horrible night. The next morning we went to the police to file a report, but even the cops seemed baffled and couldn't believe that something like that could ever happen in their small, peaceful, picture-perfect community. But they believed me, and the cop who took my statement asked me if there was somewhere I could go while they sorted out all this mess with Olaf. I told them that I was planning to visit Germany the very next day. That last day I barely spoke with Harold. I didn't blame him, but he told me that in his drunken state, he had told Olaf that I was leaving, and he was sad about it. Since Olaf had been doing drugs all night, he understood that he had to defend Harold. So Olaf cut off the internet, waited for me to go into the shower, and went upstairs to do his job. I left Norway without a single word and without looking back. They told me I could testify via Skype whenever the trial started, so they took my information down and promised justice would be served. It's been more than a year now, and I've never heard a squeak from the police. When I asked Harold about it, he told me the police dropped the case for lack of evidence, and that Olaf is back in Harold's basement doing whatever it is he does. Life goes on, and I was angry for a while, but even anger goes away if there's nothing to burn. I tried to focus on the good things in life, and life itself. Every day is a gift, or a chance, but the shadow of fear never really left me. I keep looking over my shoulder, keep studying people in case I have to defend myself, and I still have a sense of dread whenever I take a shower, especially at the gym where I'm most vulnerable. I can't help thinking that anyone else would have ended up with a bloated corpse in a pool of blood in that shower, unnoticed for hours and hours, maybe days, until someone had to use that bathroom. If I had done something differently, if Olaf hadn't been so high to be intimidated by my words, that bloated corpse would have been me. I still don't know how to get rid of the thought, but all I know is that Olaf is free, and I really, really, really don't ever want to meet him again.
When I was in college, I met this dude called Steve. He was good looking, well spoken and confident, and was instantly well liked by most of the people that he met. but he was a bit intimidating to me at first, due to the fact that he was pretty jacked and didn't speak to me a whole lot in the beginning. Here I am, an 18 going on 19-year-old fat kid with an inferiority complex that made me act out to get attention. I would wear women's clothes to class to get a laugh, or interrupt the professor with a witticism here and a joke there for the laugh. I was that kid, the one people didn't exactly dislike but weren't too eager to hang out with, because I could be a bit much at times. This did nothing to help with my feelings of inadequacy, but I didn't make the connection there until a few years later. Steve and I didn't exactly become fast and hard friends, because I got pretty drunk at a party once and he decided instantly that I was annoying. But we were still civil to each other, as we were in the same department and had a number of classes together. We hung out with different crowds too, even inside the department. Steve had recently been kicked out of boot camp in the military. He told everyone it was because he had injured himself badly enough that he had been discharged. That wasn't true, but we'll get to that later. Cut to about 4 months after me first meeting Steve, and I had been invited by a mutual friend Corey to come to a small get-together at his place, where he incidentally was roommates with Steve. I told Corey that I was kind of wary of Steve and felt that he didn't like me, to which he replied that I was right, and that's why he wanted me to come over. He wanted Steve and I to get to know each other, because he was positive we could become friends if we gave each other a shot, and after some prodding I finally agreed. When I arrived at Corey's house, there were maybe 3 other people from the department there. It seemed like a pretty chill setting. There was some alcohol being passed around, and I drank a small amount, but kept my distance from Steve. After a few hours and quite a few beers, I was starting to feel pretty good. Someone brought out a few joints, and those started getting passed around too. When one of them made its way to me, Steve spoke up. "Don't bother passing to him," he said with a mocking laugh. "He's a goody-goody." I'm not sure exactly why he said that, even though I thought that I may have once mentioned in passing that I'd never done weed before, but regardless of why he said it, it made me mad that he was making fun of me. So I did what any 19-year-old drunk dude would do. I grabbed the joint and took the biggest hit anyone could possibly take. This, for anyone who has ever smoked knows, is a huge mistake for a marijuana virgin, when quality kush is handed to him. After my coughing fit, and the laughter that ensued at my expense, I looked at Steve challengingly, and he just nodded in my direction before resuming his conversation. Now, no one told me that you shouldn't mix weed and alcohol. Had I stopped there, I would have been fine. However, I continued to drink, which worsened everything that came with being high. By the time I knew I was high, I was starting to get paranoid. I am, or at least was, a bit of a hypochondriac. Dry mouth felt like my tongue was swelling up, and my throat was starting to close. The feeling of almost weightlessness that sometimes accompanies being high made me feel like I wasn't anchored to the floor anymore. The time dilation that you experience with weed made me feel like I was frozen in time, and I began to panic. By this point, everyone else had gone home, and it was just me, Steve, and Corey. I explained to Corey that I thought I was allergic to weed because I wasn't feeling right, and oddly enough, Steve explained to me to ask what I was feeling. When I did, he walked me through all of it and calmed me down. Once I was calm, he put a controller in my hand, and we played video games until I sobered up enough to drive. It was honestly really cool of him, and it was the start of one of the best friendships I've ever had, until it became the worst and most abusive relationship I've ever been in. Over the next year or so, Steve and I became really close. I considered him one of my best friends. Being around him was almost like a drug. He just had this way of making you feel like you mattered. I know now that he was a complete sociopath, but you don't really see the signs until it's far too late. He harassed me until I started working out with him, which meant I had more energy and confidence in myself, and got into pretty decent shape. I wasn't ripped, I wasn't even what most people would call fit, but I wasn't the fat kid anymore either. He would come to my house and force me to go out to do stuff. Before I became friends with him, I was kind of a loner and a hermit. We would go to the lake just to dick around or go hiking in the woods or any number of outdoorsy type activities, and for the first time in years I had confidence in myself and was actually quite happy. Enter Lisa, the love of my life, the one who got away, or rather the one that I stupidly dumped twice over a 5-year relationship because I was scared. She's not a huge part of this story, but she plays a role. She had come to my hometown to go to school, and had a boyfriend back home, but we clicked immediately. I know you're wondering, and no, we didn't hook up or anything while she was with him. She made her intentions towards me clear, and I made it clear that nothing would happen while she was dating someone else. She told me she had been considering breaking things off with him, as he was a bit controlling and dickish, and the next day she walked up to me and kissed me full on the mouth, and when I started to push her away, she informed me that they had broken up, and that is how our relationship began. I just would like to let you know that this has nothing to do with Steve, but it was an immensely happy time for my life, and I never would have had the confidence to flirt with Lisa in the first place if it wasn't for Steve. The next year after Lisa and I got together was rather uneventful. I will admit there were some red flags with Steve that I didn't either see or just outright ignored. Looking back on it now, one of the most obvious was that one day I was hanging out with Lisa when Steve showed up. She had always gotten a bad vibe from him, and rightly so, and so when he showed up, she left to go to class 45 minutes early. Watching her walk away, Steve said, "I could take her from you if I wanted." I gave him an incredulous look, slightly panicking that this man who called himself my friend might actually want to, and be able to sway Lisa to date him instead of me. He laughed at my expression and added, "Don't worry, I don't want her. She's a 6 at best, but she's perfect for you, but I prefer my girls a little thinner and much hotter. Just thought you should know that if I wanted to, I could." It should be noted that Lisa was thin, if curvaceous and absolutely gorgeous in a very classical way. I'm now convinced that Steve was actually attracted to her, but he saw himself as the alpha and needed to assert his dominance over me as one of his perceived betas. I'm ashamed to admit that it worked. I did get angry and told him not to talk about my girlfriend in such a gross way, but once he gave a half-hearted apology, I just kind of shrugged it off. The next year, the red flags came up even more, which I chose to ignore. But the first few years weren't really that bad. Steve was starting to show his true colours, but the real horrible stuff was still to come. Also, if you're keeping track, I was at a 2-year college for 3 years. That's just how long it took me to get my associate's degree. That's neither here nor there. Steve started dating one of the freshmen in our department. I heard from others that the relationship was incredibly psychologically abusive on his end, but I kept brushing it off because the girl he was dating hadn't spoken up and Steve was a good guy, right? I mean, I hadn't witnessed it. Other people must have just misinterpreted Steve's unusual sense of humor in a way that painted him in a bad light. I was unaware at the time that of course she wouldn't speak out against him because that's exactly what psychological abuse is. It's gaslighting and insults and ensuring that the victim believes themselves to be absolutely worthless and deserving of the treatment that they receive. During the end of the year departmental party, I proposed to Lisa and she said yes. And when Lisa and I graduated from the college with an associate's degree, we decided to move to a new school together. Despite the fact that our relationship grew stronger than ever without Steve in our lives, a dot that didn't connect due to still being firmly in his psychotic grasp, the college we decided to transfer to was absolute garbage, and after a year there, we decided to transfer again to a better and cheaper school this time about an hour away. Coincidentally, it was the same school that Steve now attended. That summer, Lisa moved back to her hometown while transitioning between schools, and I ended things with her for the first time over the phone. Shitty, I know. But we were like 5 hours apart, since I had stayed behind to live on campus and work, and neither of us could find the time to visit each other. The only reason I can logically come up with this is that I was scared of the commitment. I've always said that when I marry I want it to be for life, and I got in my own head and started to worry about whether or not Lisa was the person I really wanted to spend the rest of my life with. When I moved to the new city, Steve helped me get an apartment in the same complex where he and Corey, the friend from earlier, both lived. We were in separate buildings, but the apartments were set up in a way that the courtyard between the two buildings was only like 40 feet across. I could actually see into Steve's apartment window from my second floor one when we both had our blinds open. There were many times that I would glance out the window while playing video games or something like that, and Steve would catch my eye and wave over to me. I would immediately turn my game off and head over to his place to smoke a little weed and watch one of his 4 DVDs for the billionth time. During this time in my life, I became a major alcoholic, and I'm fairly certain that Steve realized this was happening but said nothing because he wanted to be able to hold it over me. He may have contributed to my alcoholism a tiny bit. He began to use the same bullying tactics he had once employed to get me to go work out and do things. This time he was using them to get me to go out drinking. If I told him I had class early the next day or homework that needed doing, he would just wave it off and tell me that we would be back in plenty of time to get it done. We would often stay out till 2 in the morning when the bars closed, or later if he met someone cool and decided that we were going to go to their house to hang out for a bit. If I said I didn't have money, he would promise to pay for me, and at the end of the night, I would get a bill I could barely afford, and he would explain that clearly he meant he would pay for the first couple of rounds, and if I drank more it was my fault. Several times I actually had to have him lend me money, just to pay rent, which further put me in his clutches. I would like to take a brief break and address the elephant in the room. I realized that every single one of the previous mentioned problems stemmed from me. I could have moderated my drinking. I could have told him no when he asked me to go out, and I could have realized sooner that he was never truly going to pay my bar tab, or that we weren't going to be home early. And I do take responsibility for all of these things. But that being said, something you have to understand about Steve is that he would gaslight and make me feel like I was being a bad friend if I told him no, despite having a very valid reason for the refusal. What I'm trying to do by telling you this part is point out that he was never the good friend I thought he was. Or he would have pointed out that I was drinking too much. Would it have stopped me? As I know now from the numerous attempts by another true friend, no, it really wouldn't have. But at least in hindsight, I would be able to say, you know what, Steve tried to stop me drinking. He was a good friend. But back to the story. Some few months after moving into the new city, Steve introduced me to a friend of his from out of town, Jennifer. She was a pretty woman with dyed red hair, styled in a pixie cut, thin, and an athletic build with a gorgeous face. She was honestly every straight man's dream. Not only that, but she was intelligent, funny, quick-witted, and compassionate and kind. And I got a bit of a crush on her, but she was way out of my league. I asked Steve if she was seeing anyone, because at this point I still had some confidence. He told me she wasn't, and asked if I liked her. I said I did, and he assured me that he would try and get a feel for what she thought of me. Cut to a few days later, and Steve is now dating her. This confused the hell out of me because when he introduced us, they kept making jokes about how neither of them were really interested in the other, and they would never work as a couple. I think even back then, I knew he had done his psychological messing stuff to get her to date him, so he could once again assert his dominance over me. I shrugged it off, happy that my friend had found a girl to make him forget that freshman he had been dating a few years back. He had constantly moaned about missing her when she finally got the courage to tell him to go do one night after he called her fat. She was maybe 95 pounds. Over the next few weeks, I started to notice that Jem was looking more and more exhausted and haggard. When I asked if she was okay, she would just smile and assure me that her workloads were just getting with her. We had started to become friends, so I asked her not to hesitate in coming to me if there was anything I could do to help. She thanked me for the gesture, but again said she was fine. I would find out later that Steve was treating her in the same way he had treated his previous girlfriend. She apparently told Steve about my offer for help, thinking it was sweet and that I wanted to help her. And as you may have guessed, Steve flew over the handle. I'd never seen him get so angry. He came to my apartment, banged on the door and almost broke it down, screaming at me to get my two-faced ass out into the hallway so that he could kill me. I didn't know it at the time, but Steve had started taking steroids, which explained, to some extent, his unfound rage. After nearly an hour of him pacing in my living room and threatening me and yelling loud enough to wake the whole damn neighborhood, I was finally able to convince him that my intentions were nothing but friendly towards Jen. Bro code. Dictated that even if two of them broke it off, I wasn't going to be pursuing her, since she had dated one of my best friends. Once he finally believed that I wasn't trying to stuff his girl like a Thanksgiving turkey, as he put it, it was like a switch flipped. Suddenly we were best friends again, and his earlier rage seemed to have been forgotten, almost as if it had never happened. He dumped Jen shortly after. My guess is that he realized he had no romantic interest in her anymore, and therefore couldn't use his relationship with her to needle me and control me. I only saw her a handful of times after that, but the last time I saw her she looked so much happier. Yet another sign about Steve I didn't see or chose to ignore. About a month later, Lisa and I got back together. She was incredibly distrustful and wary of me at this point, and rightly so. I had broken her heart for no other reason than I was an idiot. Over time, she began to trust me with her emotions again. This was a mistake on her part, and I don't mean that to sound cruel. Perhaps I had picked up a few things from Steve. I know that I was fairly manipulative. I am much more ashamed of that now than I can ever portray in words, and I hate myself for the way I treated her during our second stint as a couple. Lisa was still uncomfortable around Steve, and would often leave if we were hanging out. He never seemed to catch on that she didn't want to be around him. Things were made far worse when we went to a house party one night and Steve groped her. Again, I'm incredibly ashamed to admit of what I did, when she came to me in tears of rage and disgust and told me what had happened. I'm ashamed because the first thing out of my mouth was, "Steve wouldn't do that. Maybe you misunderstood what was going on." "He smacked my ass and grabbed my chest," she practically yelled at me. "All right, I'll go talk to him." I should have just cut him off right then and there. I should have taken Lisa home. I should have went to knock Steve out. I should have done a whole lot of things. But I've always been a people pleaser, and Steve brought this out of me in the worst way. When I asked him about it, he told me that he had grabbed her waist to get around her in the kitchen as it was crowded, and that he had accidentally brushed past her breast while reaching for a bottle of rum. And I ate that up. I believed him, and I went back to Lisa and conveyed what had just been told to me. After a lot more enraged tears and yelling, she left. Why she just didn't dump my stupid harassment, apologetic, victim-blaming ass right there, I still don't know. And when Steve appeared a few minutes later, and I explained what happened, he put on a faux sympathetic face and said with a chuckle, "Man, screw that girl. Let's find you a hot, drunk girl who wants to give you a BJ." Even though I knew that that was a huge red flag, and that I did not want to do anything with anyone, I still ignored the signs. I didn't cheat, but I ignored the signs, and Lisa didn't speak to me for a week, and she was right to do so. I think she should have never spoken to me again. Things with Steve were a bit strained and we didn't hang out that much. Things with Lisa improved as Steve wasn't around, and we were talking even about moving in together. This would not ever happen, because I was going to break up with her again before long. I didn't know I was going to do it this time, but it was going to happen, and when it did, there were no tears like the last time, there was no pleading like we could make it work. Lisa simply fixed me in a motionless, almost dead gaze and said, "My sister told me not to trust you again. I should have listened. Get your stuff and get out." Now I really wish she had just left it at that. But over the next few years, we would go on to just have a few stints as friends with benefits. And that just about sums up what became of our relationship, friendship, or facsimile of friendship after a while. Shortly after our breakup, I became immensely depressed. I didn't realize that it was because I was still in love with Lisa. Why would I be? I had broken things off with her. Regardless, I started drinking even more and stopped working out, and started regaining all the weight I had lost in my freshman year of college. Steve noticed, regarding that I was a fat turd. I never really minded it because I was used to my weight being the butt of every other joke. Besides, he always said it with a laugh to let me know that he was only joking. The way good friends always insult each other, right? At the same time, I started hanging out with him again. One day he came to me asking if I wanted to move into a house with him, and I politely declined because I liked living alone, and my rent was relatively cheap for where I lived. He obviously called me some names and got unreasonably angry, saying that I owed him everything. He then screamed at me for half an hour and didn't speak to me for 3 days, but did eventually calm down. He never apologized for his outburst though, and when he moved out, another mutual friend took his apartment after having just gone through a bad breakup of his own, and I started hanging out with his new friend Mark quite a bit, since he lived just across the courtyard and Steve was a few miles away. During this time I met a man through Mark who would go on to become one of my 2 best friends that I had ever met. Enter Nick. Remember the friend from earlier who I said regularly tried to get me to stop drinking? That's Nick. He was and is a man who, for some reason, I never want to disappoint. Even today, being mostly sober, a huge part of what keeps me from drinking is the idea that if Nick ever found out, I would be more ashamed of myself than if I publicly crapped my pants in front of the woman of my dreams. Personally, to me, that's a mark of true friendship, mostly because Nick never asked or expected anything of me. In fact, I think he's a little uncomfortable to be with, but not something I can just turn off. Nick and I hit it off fairly quickly and started hanging out regularly. It was with Nick and his circle of friends, all of whom I now proudly know as my own friends, that a Dungeons & Dragons group was started that lasted for nearly 4 years. Nick plays a bigger, if not huge, part in this story later. Things continued in this way for maybe half a year before I finally decided to take Steve up on his offer and move into the house with him, mostly because money was tight and my bills would go down. His current roommates had moved away for whatever reason, and he had a few vacancies. I took one room, and a friend of his from when he was in boot camp, Greg, took the other. For a while, thinking things were awesome, Steve had apparently become Catholic. He was off the juice. It was like I had my old friend back from the days when we had started becoming chummy. He, Greg and I would often go on road trips or just go out to bars or go to some outdoor attractions around the city and walk around. Now remember that I said Steve had been discharged from the military and claimed that it was due to an injury? Turns out it wasn't true at all. One night while Steve was at work, Greg and I were hanging out with some beers, and somehow the topic came up. "You know, he was just crazy, right?" Greg asked. "What do you mean?" "He got kicked out before he finished boot camp." "Really? He told me he suffered some kind of injury and they had to let him go." After I said this, an incredulous look came over Greg's face and he turned slowly to look at me. He told me that Steve had reason to suspect that his then wife was cheating on him and had been overheard by a commanding officer saying that when he's finished with boot camp he was going to go murder both of them and the daughter that he and his wife had. He had been given an in-depth psychological evaluation and been discharged essentially for being too insane for the military. I later confirmed this with some of Steve's childhood friends. At this point I was starting to realize who Steve really was, thinking back on some of the interactions I'd had with him. Unfortunately, I was stupidly loyal to someone I perceived to be a good friend. At some point, I had invited Nick to come over and hang out to play video games and whatnot, and when Steve met Nick, he immediately called him fat. Now, Nick was at the time a large man. He has since made enormous strides in his fitness journey. Shout out to Nick for all your hard work if you're listening to this, you look great. And regardless, I remember the look of utter disbelief on Nick's face. But I defended Steve, saying that that's just how he made friends. If he wasn't calling you names, then it meant he didn't like you, lol. By the way, just as a side point, can we stop that? Treating people like crap is not a way to break the ice, it's terrible. And I'm guilty of doing this in the past, and I hate that I used to do it. Anyway, not relevant. I could tell Nick was skeptical, but he just kind of went with it. I think he kind of resented me for not defending him, but never said so. After a few weeks after the conversation with Greg, Steve had a friend of his from out of town stay with us for the weekend. Greg was out of town for some reason. But before Steve's friend arrived, he told me that she was fat, but pretty, and that if I wanted her, I had his blessing. This did not sit well with me because not only of how he described her, which I learnt wasn't true when she arrived, but because he felt the need to give his permission for 2 of his friends to have relations with each other. I kept my mouth shut though. I forgot the woman's name, but she was very pretty, curvaceous, but in no way fat. I was confused as to why Steve would describe her in this way. She and I got along really well from the start, and she and Steve slept together. Again, I'm fairly certain he slept with her because he could tell I was taking a liking to her. I wasn't falling over myself to get into a relationship with her, but I did think she was quite nice. Steve had to once again assert his dominance over me. The next day we all had lunch at a local restaurant, and Steve essentially left his friend and myself to drive his car back to the house while he wandered off to do God knows what. I was infuriated that he would do that. Not necessarily the leave us part, but the fact that his friend had come to town specifically to visit him and he just bailed on her with no reason. She and I spent the day watching movies and playing video games, and we talked quite a bit about Steve, as he was our one common link. And a lot of things came to light about Steve. I messaged him multiple times throughout the day asking where he was, and he didn't respond until about midnight. I sent a text telling him it was kind of crappy to just leave his friend with me, as she had come to see him, and the text I got back just read, "Mind your business, fatty, I'll be home when I get home." He finally rolled up around 10 the next morning when his friend was getting ready to leave. He was driving a motorcycle that I'd never seen before. He barely said goodbye to the woman as she was leaving, and when the door closed I rounded on him, asking where he was, feeling myself get angrier by the word. Not that it's any of your business, but I was helping a friend bury a body. He shot back as he walked into his room. I knew instantly that this was a lie. I just had this intuition when it came to Steve. I could almost tell when he was lying, and this one was just so outlandish that I didn't even need to consider it. "No, you weren't," I said under my breath. "What was that, fatty?" he said, coming back to me in the room shirtless, getting in my face. I gently pushed him away from me and he looked utter dumbfounded. He couldn't believe I would ever stand up to him like this. "I said you're lying," I retorted quickly. "But if you want to treat your friends like crap, when they travel 4 hours just to hang out with you for a few days, be my guest." We stood there glaring at each other for a few seconds before he deflated and looked slightly ashamed, which shocked the hell out of me. "I was with a girl I've been dating," he said softly. "So you invited a friend to stay with us," I said, my anger rising again, "and cheated on your girlfriend with her and bailed on us and then lied to me about it? Screw you, douchebag." I turned on my heel and stormed to my room. I'm fairly certain Steve then threw a projectile at me but missed, because I had a thump on the wall to my left of the doorway as I walked through it. I didn't stop to find out. I didn't speak to Steve for a few days after that. And it wasn't until Greg returned from his trip and noticed that we weren't spending time together and were acting coldly towards one another that our friendship started to repair a bit. Mostly due to Greg yelling at us that he wasn't going to live with a few girls who couldn't get their act together and act like adults. Despite our relationship repairing slightly, things were never really the same after that. Over the next few months, Steve started to sell drugs and always kept a loaded gun in the house. I specifically remember him telling me one day that some guy was going to be coming over to give him some money that he was owed, and if he showed up while Steve was at work, I was supposed to take the money, count it, and put it in his bedroom desk. I didn't know he was dealing at the time, and so assumed the guy just owed him money. I just agreed and went back to playing video games, as he left for work. Steve got home from work before the guy showed up, and when there was a knock at the door, Steve came out of his room with his gun in hand and held a finger to his lips. He opened the door to reveal a man standing in the porch with a wad of cash in his hand. Steve immediately pointed the gun in his face, cocked the hammer back and started screaming at him to drop the money on the ground and get off his porch. As the dude was fleeing in terror, Steve yelled at him that if he ever saw him again, he would end him. Of course, I was immediately distressed by what I had just witnessed, but I was equally terrified when he turned to me with a huge grin after collecting the money from the porch and closing the door. I just gave a weak smile and ignored the whole thing, and learned later that he was back on the steroids when this happened. During this time, Steve would regularly come home late at night, 3 sheets to the wind, ranting about one ethnic group or another. The one thing that sticks out in my mind the most was when he stumbled in so drunk that he could barely string together a coherent thought. He was yelling about globalism and how the Chinese were trying to take over the world. He mumbled a string of words I couldn't make out and then shouted, "Pingling!" followed by another string of unintelligible and crazy words, and finally, "Screwing our daughters," were the last words that left his lips, and he immediately fell to the floor and began to sob. I had no idea what to do. If I tried to help him, I knew he would get violent towards me. In the end, I did nothing and went to my room. A few weeks after that particularly charming incident, Steve and I got into an argument about something that I can't remember. He stormed off to his room and I thought it was over. I knew from experience that given time and distance he would calm down, but would never apologize. At least the situation would de-escalate, but I was wrong this time. 10 minutes later he came crashing back into the living room, gun in hand, pointing to my face. He was yelling that if I didn't give him respect, that he may as well kill me. "You're not going to shoot me," I said far more calmly than I felt. Inside, I was crapping my pants, despite the fact I honestly did believe he wasn't going to shoot me. I had been around guns before, but had never had one pointed at me. "Yeah?" he said. "Why do you think that?" "I know it. You're not going to shoot me because I'm one of the few friends you've got left." He seemed to consider this for a moment and finally lowered the gun. His face was still murder incarnate, but at least the gun wasn't pointing at me. "Can you move, man? I'm trying to watch Netflix." He continued staring at me for a long time, seemingly trying to internally fight himself before finally stomping back to his room. I didn't see him again for the rest of the night. A few days later, Steve and Greg asked me to sit down when I came home from my third double in a row at the restaurant where I worked. I asked why, and they said, "We need to talk about me living there." I told them there was no need. I was moving out. They seemed satisfied with this, and I went to my room to get some much-needed sleep. As a side note, as I was moving out, I accidentally broke the handle of the storm door and Steve lost his mind, screaming at me and calling me all kinds of names, including the M-word. I assured him that I would replace it, but he just kept calling me names. Nick was helping me move out at the time, and once we were away from the house, he gave me a look that spoke volumes. "I know," I said. This was the point that I finally snapped and realized that Steve was nothing but a toxic piece of crap. It took someone I hadn't known for very long giving me a single look for that puzzle piece to finally fall into place and make me go, "Wow, he's a bag of dicks." After I moved out, I only saw Steve once. I was coming out of my class at the university campus and he drove up on his motorcycle and started trying to make conversation, but I just made some lame excuse about needing to get to work or home or something and walked away. About a year later, I blocked Steve completely on all social media, where he commented on a Facebook post and called my mum something horrible. I don't know why I didn't do it sooner. About a year after that, Nick and I were at the mall. Being on a bit of time crunch and needing things from different stores, we decided to head in different directions and meet in the food court. I finished what I needed to do first and was standing in front of Dairy Queen waiting for Nick to meet me, when I get a phone call from him. "What's up?" I said by way of answering. "I just saw Steve," he said without preamble. He was going to the store I was coming out of. He didn't need to tell me which Steve. He knew most of the words I've put into this story by this point, although I'm sure some of these anecdotes would have surprised even him. My heart seemed to seize and I couldn't breathe. I hadn't seen or spoken to Steve in over 2 years, and the thought of coming face to face with him now filled me with dread. "Hello, you there?" "Yeah, I'll meet you at the car." "That's why I told you I'll be out in a bit." I practically sprinted to the car and just kept praying to whatever gods may exist that Nick would be out sooner. I went over and over in my mind what I would say if Steve did show up, but luckily I never had to find out, because Nick appeared pretty quickly and we left. That was the last I heard of him. These incidents that are portrayed in this story are not everything that happened over the course of my relationship with him. There were more, including more death threats, more physical altercations, more name-calling, and insurance fraud that Steve decided to rope me into without my knowledge. These were just the worst, or more poignant incidents that need to be told in order to paint Steve as he truly is. Were I to share the entire story of Steve, it would likely wind up being a whole novel. A lot of it, while terrible, isn't really that relevant in the grand scheme of things. So, there it is. I know at this point you're probably wondering, why didn't I just leave Steve in the dust a long time ago? Why didn't I just walk away from the friendship at the first sign of trouble? Well, there are a few reasons. First and foremost, Steve was a sociopath. They are extremely well versed in making people trust them, even as they treat them like trash. Not to mention, he gaslit me, made me feel as though a lot of the smaller incidents were my fault, that in turn led me to believing the bigger problems were my fault too. This is how psychological abusers keep control. Secondly, I am a loyal friend to a fault. I will see the best in people I care about, even if they stab me in the back and beat me down. This is a fault of mine that I'm working on, and I only saw the terrible in Steve when he treated another friend I was loyal to like crap. A part of me was also terrified to walk away. There was a piece of me that was scared and sometimes still is since I blocked him. that he would get it in his head to kill me because I rejected him. This is again part of the conditioning that abusers do, but regardless, I'm much happier now the whole thing is behind me. I'd like to end this on a final note. If you're in a relationship of any kind and you start to see red flags, don't ignore them like I did. I explained away a lot of the red flags that Steve was waving proudly, and I regret it to this day. I was lucky. I got out of the most toxic friendship I've ever known, with only some psychological trauma and having my confidence shattered. But it could have ended so much worse. If you need help getting out, seek it immediately. Leave everything behind if you have to. Things can be replaced, but you cannot be. Thanks for listening. And Steve, please stay away from me. I never want to see or hear from you again.
While I was in university, I took my motorbike down to pick up my wife, who was my girlfriend during this story. She worked in an office building downtown and was fortunate enough to get off work early on Friday afternoons. So I hopped on my Kawasaki Ninja and headed downtown. I called my girlfriend with the comms unit attached to my helmet to let her know I was near her office building and looking for parking. She informed me that she would meet me at the food court in the mall that is across the street from her building. Now, for reference, I always bring my helmet with me no matter what. I learnt my lesson from leaving it on my bike and having it stolen once before. The other thing is, I had a second helmet in my backpack for my girlfriend. Safety first. The second helmet will become important later. After meeting her in the food court and having a meal, we wandered around the mall, looking at engagement rings and such. She found a ring she liked very much and, yes ladies, I ended up buying it. While I dumped my wallet out on the counter and imagining my bank account emptying, my girlfriend grabbed my arm and said, "Hey, the same two guys have walked past the store for the 5th time while we've been in here, and they keep looking at us." In order to relax her, I responded with the ever clever, "They're just jealous because of how damn good I look in my riding gear." Really, it's a problem. Through laughter, my girlfriend proceeded to inform me that my sexy outfit made me look like a fat ninja. With the two guys forgotten and my ego obliterated, we left the store to make our way towards the bike. To get there, we had to go down 2 escalators, walk across the bottom floor of the mall, across the street, and into the lot of her office building, where my bike was parked. Just as we stepped onto the first escalator, my girlfriend suddenly grabbed my arm really tight and used her eyes to draw my attention to 2 guys directly behind us. I looked back at her, and with a slight nod, she confirmed that it was the same guys that had walked by the store. I took off my backpack and pulled the second bike helmet out the bag and handed it to my girlfriend so that we could hasten our journey. As we stepped off the escalator and made our way to the second one, I caught the reflection of the 2 guys in the glass window of the stores in the mall. They were behind us alright. I could hear them making comments about my girlfriend's appearance to each other as we walked, but not quietly. Their comments were loud for other people to hear. When we reached the second escalator, my blood was boiling. It took everything in me to not turn around and face the perverts head on. My girlfriend absolutely hates conflict, and out of respect for her, I kept my mouth shut and doubled our efforts to leave. While we were walking towards the exit on the main floor, I heard it. The sentence that will forever make me paranoid. One of them said to the other, "Let's kill him and take her." For the sake of your ears, dear listeners, I did not use the vulgar words that they used to describe their intentions. My girlfriend's grip on my bicep tightened like a vice, and then I heard it and saw it. She was sobbing, and I could see the wide-eyed fear in her face. I pushed her directly in front of me to force a faster pace out of the mall. We exited and started to turn the corner of the street, where we had to cross. My girlfriend kept looking back with a panicked voice, and she said, "They're coming." Hearing the fear in her voice made something snap. I shut everything out and went cold. As soon as we got out of the corner, I forced my girlfriend around it and went against the wall. I looked at her, and she looked right back at me. We ran. I took the helmet that she was clutching in her hands with a firm grip. She took off across the street heading for the bike, and I stood there waiting. I took the moment to get my helmet on for protection, and took the second helmet in my hand ready. I heard the sound of running footsteps coming down the sidewalk around the corner. What happened next may just be the craziest damn thing I've ever done. Before I continue with the story, ask yourself, if you heard those words from two perverts following you and your loved one, would you play it off as them being punks trying to scare you? Or would you take it as seriously as a heart attack, like I did? These two threatened to kill me. I was okay with that, I accepted that. But what they threatened my girlfriend with, I refused to brush off. She was a victim of sexual assault before I knew her, and absolutely refused the smallest chance of something like that ever happening to her again. As soon as the two guys neared the corner, I stepped forward and gave them the universal sign for slow down by taking a swing. Let me be the first to tell you that when a motorcycle helmet meets a person's face, that's the start and the end of a fight. Period. No, I didn't end his life, but I guarantee the guy felt like I did. Pervert number 2, at my surprise, didn't even flinch at the sight of his body being destroyed. He threw some punches and I took those punches. We locked arms and he slammed me into the wall. I pulled my head back and headbutted the guy with my helmet on. He stumbled backwards and I seized the moment and kicked him on the side of the knee and threw some punches of my own. At this point, my girlfriend had made it back to the bike and had called the authorities. Being downtown, they came quick. Now here's the part I regretted. I grabbed the helmet I used to take down pervert number 1 and sprinted to my bike. I didn't wait for the authorities to arrive, with the story my girlfriend gave to the police. The two guys left broken on the sidewalk with lots of witnesses. I figured the smart thing to do was head directly to the bike and take my girlfriend away from the horror show. The two perverts ended up being arrested and taken away. Apparently they had a history with law enforcement. Luckily, I was not thrown in the back of a police car for being the first one to dish out damage. Witnesses, their prior offenses, and security camera evidence from them all saved my ass. I meant it wholeheartedly that I was willing to go to jail to protect my girlfriend from two predators. The following summer, we got engaged and I got her a new helmet. I threw the old one out as it was a constant reminder of that scary event. I'm not sure what the pervert duo are up to these days, but for their sakes, let's not meet again. Because if we do, you can bet your life I'll have my helmet with me. This happened about 2 years ago. Before I begin, I want to address this situation may be triggering to some viewers, as it's slightly graphic and may be upsetting to those who have experienced sexual abuse. I'm sharing this encounter to serve as wisdom, to always listen to your instincts and to stop ignoring the bad in others. I've been the type to overlook the bad and focus on the good, or even to make excuses for shady behavior. Doing so has put me in some dangerous situations. You are not a bad or judgmental person for noticing shady behavior and to choose to walk away from it. It is so important to be open to others' dark side, to protect yourself. Here's what happened. I was living in Tacoma, Washington at the time in my late 20s. I'm 30 now. Tacoma is not a safe city, and it was very challenging to make friends and meet anyone because of the crime, and also being a reserved person. Basically, I'm not the most forthcoming at social interactions. I was recommended a group on Facebook that was called something along the lines of Introvert and Extrovert Social Singles. After only being in the group for a few days, an older man named Sean had started messaging me. He was a bit high energy, and said he had ADD, so I figured that's why he was so pushy to talk so much, and right away wanted to talk on the phone. We talked about a lot of different subjects, and he seemed very outgoing and direct. Over the course of the phone call, he had mentioned some other women he met in the group and how they'd hooked up. I made it very clear that I am not the hookup type, and that I was only interested in having friends. This was stressed a few times. For one, I was in no way attracted to Sean romantically. He was much older than me, had a child and strings with his ex, and I didn't want to be involved in that. However, some men just can't seem to understand that no really means no. During the course of the few hours we spoke, judging by what he said, the word rape kept springing forth. I kept getting images of being sexually assaulted, not particularly by him at the time, and I didn't feel an instinctual bad feeling, and I just chalked up the images as paranoia, as I have experienced abuse growing up, and at the time, I felt a bit paranoid being alone with men, so I figured that was where things were coming from. Needless to say, that belief was incorrect. After talking for several hours, Sean wanted to meet in person. He mentioned how he only lived about a half-hour away, and asked to grab dinner and go to the beach. At first, I said no. I mean, we had only been talking for a day and a half. This was all pretty sudden for me, but he pushed, and oh man was he slick. At the time, I was living with my mum, which he knew about. He told me he wouldn't try anything and that he's not like that. He had a daughter, and that he wouldn't do anything to me that he wouldn't want someone doing to his own child. He told me he was an empath, and that he could feel so deeply for other people, blah blah blah, and even told me to have my mum meet him. She could take down his phone number, his license plate, anything that would prove he wasn't a creep. You'd think the fact that he would be so pushy to prove he wasn't a creep, that I would have digressed, but he was so damn pushy, and I told myself to give him a chance, and made all sorts of excuses to go. I was smart though. I met him at the mailboxes in front of the apartment complex instead of meeting me directly at my place. He met my mum. He even told her the nonsense he told me about how he wouldn't try anything and how he has a daughter too. So we went to a nearby deli, grabbed some dinner and drinks, and headed to the beach. In person he was very different in demeanor than over the phone. He was much more quiet, and seemed like a different person. I mean, he looked the same as his pictures, but it was like a different person flicked on. Before we got out of his car, he pulled out some buds for us to smoke. I'm no stranger to the green, so I wasn't concerned about getting high with someone. I didn't know that then, but in retrospect I realized he did this for me to be a bit more manipulated later. We had our dinner, and when we were finished eating, he wanted to walk around. It was so awkward, he barely spoke, even when I tried to make conversation. It was just uncomfortable. He had talked so much over the phone that he interrupted me, and now he's super quiet, and seemed to know his way around the beach pretty well for someone who claimed they hadn't been to Tacoma very much. Alongside the beach, there's this hill that leads up to a forested area that overlooks it. He had us walk up there and straight away went to a specific bench I didn't even know about in the area and sat down. He pulled out a joint again, and we talked some more, just chilling and staring at the beach. Now here's where things started going south. He started rubbing the back of his head and neck, and told me how these areas were really tense and sore, and proceeded to ask me if I would massage them for him. I went quiet, thinking to myself, are you serious? While paused, unsure of what to say. What, it's not a big deal, it's just hard for me to massage myself. It's easier if someone does it for me. I'm not trying anything, it's just really sore, don't overthink it. I felt super awkward and hesitated, but again, he told me not to overthink it. It's not a big deal. And being pretty high, I was doing my best to stick with a just be cool kind of mode, so I uncomfortably agreed. I got up and quickly massaged his neck a few times, and sat back down on the other side of the bench as quickly as possible. A minute or two goes by in silence when he complains again and asks for me to massage a little longer. I breathe a heavy sigh, hoping he'd get the point that I didn't want to do this, especially given he claims he's an empath, and I was irritated he wasn't picking up on the vibes of me being uncomfortable. I told myself, okay, he bought you dinner. He shared his weed. The least you can do is give him a small massage, no big deal. So again, I gave him a quick, short massage and sat back down. Now allow me to mention I was in no way wearing anything revealing nor suggestive. I had on skinny jeans, a shirt, and a jean jacket. When I sat back down, he put his hand on my back. Oh God, what is he doing, I thought. I kept telling myself to be cool and not overthink it. Maybe he was just trying to be nice. He started massaging my lower back. I moved over to silently tell him to stop doing it, but that didn't work. He put his hand down my bare back and slipped his hand under my shirt and began massaging my bare skin. I immediately got up from the bench and began walking towards the edge of the forest hill. Internally I was racing. I didn't have my mum, my car, or anyone else nearby to pick me up. I was super high, experiencing a war inside of myself, questioning if I'm being paranoid or if he's just being a pervert. I didn't know what to do. I felt scared and trapped, but kept telling myself I was overthinking the situation. I made excuses again and tried to play it cool. I should have just ordered an Uber or something and gone home, but I was worried about the cost, and honestly, I just truly believed to some degree that maybe I was judging him or just overthinking the situation. He eventually emerged from the bench and addressed me to follow him down to the forested area further. I'd like to say the bench incident was the end of it, but it was merely the beginning. He finds a little dirt ledge facing a really nice spot to the ocean and sits down. I stood there though. I didn't want to be next to him at this point, doing my best to keep some sort of distance between us when he asks me to sit down. I'd like to add, one of the reasons I felt so intimidated is that Sean is huge. I mean, he's at least 6'1" or 2", heavy built, while I'm a 5'7" and lack upper body strength. I hesitated to sit down, but eventually did a good distance from him. He moved closer to me and oh my god, he laid his head on my upper leg, then tells me he has a headache and he'd like me to give him a head massage. I finally plucked up the courage and said, "I don't feel comfortable doing that." My voice was nearly shaking, and I was close to feeling paralyzed. He looked up at me and just said, "We're friends. It's not a big deal. It's platonic. Stop making a big deal out of it." I still feel uncomfortable and a bit frozen. I guess he took notice and gave me a lecture about how he's comfortable with me, how he gives me massages and receives them from his friends. Basically made me feel like I was abnormal for feeling uncomfortable about this, so I hesitated and proceeded to do what he asked. After a minute or two I made some excuse that my legs hurt, and that I needed to get up. He got up with me and started leading us back to the beach area. I started feeling relieved now that we were around other people and in public when he stopped me, pulled out his phone and took a picture of me. I found this even more strange, and he goes on this rant about how he wanted to show his other empath friends what I looked like. Why? Just why? He went on about how all his friends are empaths and how they all care so much for each other, and I guess he wanted his friend to read me. So strange. So uncomfortable. We returned to his car. He turned on some music and offered me another smoke. I thought because we were in public now that things would be okay despite how awkward it had been. I did what I could to make a weird situation the best I could, and I won't lie, he had decent taste in music. All started going fairly well at this point. He was talking a little more and it wasn't feeling very awkward, and I was enjoying the high. By the area we were parked at, there was some train tracks, and a very loud train going by shook the car. Not so good when you're stoned. So we both wanted to leave. He wanted to hang out more and I wanted to go home, and we ended up talking about going to a park that was near where I lived to just finish the joint. It was beginning to get dark, but I thought it wouldn't be a big deal to finish the joint and then go home, as things seemed to be more chill now. I know you're probably thinking that I'm an idiot, and I was. I know, you're right. I was being a super idiot. While we attempted to get to the park, I swear to God he pretended to not know where to go. I gave him precise and easy to follow directions, but he just couldn't find his way. By this time it was night out, and he was driving and pretending to be lost, and he asked if I'd rather just go to his house and spend the night. No. I told him no, and that I'd rather just go home. It's dark, and all the feelings that had dissipated earlier of feeling uncomfortable just increased by 10. Instead of taking me home, he pulled over on some dark residential area where there wasn't even a street light, and now was very uncomfortable. We weren't very far from where I lived, and there was a Fred Meyer grocery store in view, so I figured I could run to the store to grab help. I did my best to play out what happened next as calmly as I could. When he pulled over and turned off his car, he told me he needed a break from driving, that he was super tired now and wanted to take a 5-minute nap before driving me home. We were about a mile from where I lived. This was shady. I put my hand on the handle of the car, prepared to jump out at any moment, when I realized all the doors were locked. It was at this point I was in full panic mode. I didn't realize he had locked the doors, and though most people do in a moving car, it just increased the feeling of, oh crap, in me. He reclines his seat back then closes his eyes and proceeds to put his hands on my shoulder. My stomach drops. I'm fighting back tears, not sure what to do, so I pulled out my phone on the other side of me to where he couldn't see and texted my mum, telling her I needed her to call me immediately with some fake emergency to get home and that I was in danger. My mum didn't answer right away. Next thing I know, Sean is rubbing down my arm, and I look over to see he's got a semi. He says, in a tired voice, "Would you rub my leg the way you rub my neck at the beach?" Attempting to not cry, I used as much assertiveness in my voice as I could to say, "No, I don't feel comfortable doing that." He kept rubbing my shoulder, and now was making subtle moaning sounds. I felt frozen. I was just about as used to as much adrenaline as I could handle to open the car and run like there was no tomorrow, when finally my mum called with the fake emergency. I pretended to be distressed and played it out convincingly, but I swear something in me could tell I knew he was lying. He was really hesitant to take me home at first, because I had assured my mum I'd be home within a few minutes and told her exactly where we were. This seemed to be enough to get him to comply. Blessed from the gods, he agreed to take me home. I was so scared he'd figure out I was lying and trying to do something else, but as he followed through and dropped me off where we'd met, as I was getting out of the car he said we should do this again sometime. And with all the strength I could muster and a fake smile, I just said, "Yeah, sure," and walked in a different direction to the complex than where I actually lived to throw him off. As soon as I got inside, the first thing I said to my mom was that I needed a shower. She was so concerned and thought he actually succeeded in doing something worse, but I assured her he had not. I explained what had happened, and then I texted him something along the lines of, "I knew what you were trying to do, perv. How dare you use your own daughter as a way to manipulate others," and said other profanities before blocking him on everything, and alerted 2 admins within the group about the situation, and they blocked him. I left the group after that. However, the situation devastated me intensely, as it reminded me of the unresolved trauma from my childhood and teen years. I had to get out of town to get some air. I'm sorry this was so long, but I sincerely hope it serves as a lesson to others to not be trusting and to listen to your own feeling no matter how convincing someone is. Things could have ended up worse. I moved from that area and actually feel safe about the publicity sharing this experience now. And to Sean, the manipulating pervert, may you get what you dish out. Let's never meet again. I love karaoke. It feels so expressive and cathartic to me that it helps me get through all of my bad days. I'm from a small regional town in Australia, so my choices for karaoke were very much limited to one underground bar a week. I went weekly, knew the regulars, and would occasionally drink until I had to do songs from pure memory, as the rest of my senses were shot. This was not one of those nights. I was wandering in with a friend of my sister's and a director that was auditioning me at this karaoke night, who also knew the other girl. I'm very socially anxious, so I kept to myself and ignored the strangers in the bar. I sang a few songs, got the part in the play, and my night wrapped up when a douchebag friend of the director's kept harassing the girl who was a year younger than me and about 45 years younger than him. I went to follow her because she was drunk and vulnerable, and there's no way I was going to leave her alone in that state. I got the douchebags that followed us away from her and promised the director and her friend that I would look after her and make sure she got home safely. God, I should have just left when she refused for a lift and insisted we find her friend. She calls up her friend who is on loudspeaker, and we both hear her swearing, screaming and crying. She runs and I go after her in case she needs my help. We find 3 guys walking away with this one girl sobbing on the ground bleeding as they had just punched her in the face. I watched as her friends helped her, and I turn my back on the guys to make sure we are walking away before I look back and they're all gone. Noticing the absence of the people, one of these guys just punched, and no one around, they started walking back to me and surrounding me, where at this point my fight or flight response turned into freeze or friend, and hopefully these dudes would go away. I'm immediately running through in my head if I should try and take them, but despite them looking a year younger, they were all taller and built from the gym, and 3-on-1 fighting should be avoided. One of the guys starts talking to me and saying that he was watching me at karaoke all night, and how wonderful I was and that I should join them, and he grabs my hand and starts tugging me towards a decrepit abandoned building with no light coming from the area. I pull my hand out of his and slowly just say, "Sorry, but I've got to go meet up with a friend. Lovely meeting you." What happened next sent chills down my spine and put me in a state of shock. One of the guys moved behind me to block my path, and the other friend blocked me from stepping around the main offender, and I just hear the words, "Oh, come on, Mary McClare, come with us. We know you come here every week." The guy starts to feel my breast and I step away. "We've come so far, and talking to the guy who runs the karaoke, we know so much about you. And I'm sure we'll bump into one another again if you don't come hang out with us now." To this day, I don't know how the hell I didn't just crap myself there and then. I maintained my poker face, and after 5 more minutes of this harassment and trying to pull me into the dark, which I refused to go to even if I had to punch them and risk myself getting beaten up, just kept edging away. Finally, the group of people had come back, and the drunk girl I was with started shouting obscenities and told me to run. I did a loop around a weirdly shaped post office and ran back to the karaoke place where I told them what happened, and that the guys were still following me. They didn't believe me as they were inside the bar the entire time, because it was winter and cold outside, and told me they couldn't let me in even if I was hiding from the guys, because no one is allowed to go back in after 11 PM no matter what. Absolutely sobbing at this point, I ran to my car and drove off, with the guys watching me drive away. I see a police car stop beside them, which really stopped them from watching me, where I was driving, and get the hell out of there. I filed a police report 2 days later, with some of their words telling me that if I told anyone that they would find me, weighing heavily on me. Nothing ever came of it as the police didn't know where to start looking, and the cops, who stopped the guys, never actually getting their names or realizing they were the dudes who punched a girl in the face, and the policeman who took my statement didn't give two craps, despite the more terrifying details of what they were saying to me for the 20-minute long encounter. In response to what happened to me, they never changed the 11 PM rule and just said, "If someone asks, we'll walk them to their car." I said, "Are you even going to tell your patrons that this is an option for them so that they know and your staff know?" I got a no, and only attended twice more after that, and to this day have not returned. And to the 3 guys on the street who ruined karaoke for me forever, and the scumbags including the director, I sincerely hope I never have the misfortune of meeting you again. I was in my late teens when Jeff first stumbled into my life in earnest. I was working in a cushy mall in a suburb northwest of Chicago at Hot Topic. If this suburb was my natural habitat, the place where I had grown up, then Hot Topic was my environmental niche within that larger habitat. I was still in the early stages of an eating disorder, the stage where people still complimented me on my figure and exclaimed things like, "Oh, I wish I could be as skinny as you." It's suffice to say that I was rolling with various assorted insecurities. I wouldn't realize until much later that I radiated the sort of insecurity that acts as catnip to people with bad intentions. I suspect this is what drew Jeff to me in the first place. As one might expect for a store that specializes in selling goods to angsty suburban teens, shoplifting was a problem. So I was in loss prevention mode when I first glimpsed Jeff, glancing nervously in my direction from behind a display of MLP miscellany. He behaved like a shoplifter, minimizing his body as if to hide, nervously monitoring my attention, lingering far too long at the display without making a selection. Classic shoplifting tells. So, acting like the adult that I desperately wanted to be, I walked over to him and asked if I could help him with anything. He looked as if he was going to crawl out of his skin to escape. He then managed to stammer out an, "I'm just looking," before booking a hasty retreat out of the store. I congratulated myself on a job well done and went back to my duties, thinking that it had been the end of it. I did note that Jeff looked familiar, gaunt, pale, long stringy hair and dressed in clothes so large that it was difficult to ascertain his body type. He was not the sort of person one would forget crossing paths with, However, I wasn't certain where I first encountered him. I didn't devote much effort to solving the mystery. I finished out my workday and went home. Thoughts of the strange encounter evaporated almost instantly after punching out, but several days later Jeff returned. This time he didn't content himself with lurking behind the displays. Instead, he slided up to the counter and began to vomit a thick stream of words in my direction. Jeff told me that he had spotted me around school before he graduated, and I looked cool, like someone he'd like to get to know. He moved around a lot, which made it hard to make friends, and everyone at our school hated him and tried to make his life miserable despite the fact he's a nice guy who's really into vampires, even though all the people at school liked Twilight, but not him, because he knew that Bella was the only scream vampire worth anyone's time. He spoke in one long, never-ending run-on sentence. In fact, I was more of a captivated audience for a monologue than a participant in any conversation. Everything about this was strange, but I chastised myself for being judgmental. The poor guy just said everyone hated him. I thought the least I could do was reserve my judgment and show perhaps a little compassion. I tried to make small talk with him, asking him where he had lived and for how long. His answers were ordinary enough. Still, his behavior triggered a silent alarm within me. Despite myself, I couldn't help but physically back away from him. I noticed Jeff. He didn't care. This disregard for my comfort would become a pattern throughout our many uncomfortable interactions. Over the course of a few months, Jeff became a regular. He seemed to appear every day that I worked. Sometimes he would make a purchase, sometimes he would come and just stand at the counter talking to me, or following me around the crowded store on days that I worked floor. Stopping to chit-chat with employees wasn't particularly unusual. There were several customers who would step in for a chat a few minutes with other employees, and then go about their day. What was unusual was the frequency and duration of Jeff's visits. He would stay for hours at a time when I had to cash out customers, also known as doing the job that I was being paid for. He seemed agitated. He would step to the side, allowing the customer to approach the register, then fold his arms across his chest and tap his foot, silently urging me to speed up the transaction. Then once the transaction was complete, he would step straight back to the counter and continue on without missing a beat. I also found the content of our conversation disturbing. As time passed, he shared increasingly personal information with me. He frequently told me how his mother and his psychologist were attempting to make him appear crazy, and they were forcing him to take medication. He told me that he hoped something terrible would happen to them, like a terrible wasting illness. Indeed, Jeff's favorite topics of discussion were the people that had wronged him and the horrible fate that he hoped would befall them. I recognized this was not appropriate, but truth be told, I was afraid to ask him to leave. I sensed that he was the sort of person who would become dangerous, and it just seemed easier and safer to listen to his rants than to tell him he had to leave the store. One day Jeff was particularly loud, and this prompted my manager to tell him to leave. Once he was gone, my manager gave me a talking to about having my friends visit me at work. I quickly explained that I didn't know Jeff personally. He and I were definitely not friends, and I recounted the increasingly bizarre personal stories he subjected me to, and I expressed that I always felt uncomfortable and unsafe when he was around. When I told her this, her anger quickly morphed into concern. She promised that this would not continue. If he came in on my next shift, she would tell him in no uncertain terms that he was to purchase his items and then leave the store. Any interaction with staff should be restricted to questions about the merchandise, and she kept her word. The next day that I worked, Jeff entered the store and made a beeline for me at the counter, but my manager interposed herself between us. She then proceeded to lay down the law to Jeff. I expected him to argue, but instead he clenched his fists and jaw tightly, nodding as she spoke, veins bulging in his bright red face. Then he turned on his heels and stomped. As he disappeared from view, a wave of relief washed over me. Over the past several months, I had grown increasingly anxious whenever I worked. I watched the doors nervously, knowing that Jeff would appear but never knowing when. I felt powerless, listening to his precursory delusions day after day. I never realized how strongly I dreaded him, until that dread was washed away, and I felt as if I could breathe again. For several weeks, everything was perfectly blissfully normal. Then one Saturday, the phone started calling. I was at the counter when it rang. Happily, I snatched the phone off the cradle and chirped my cheeriest, "Hello, this is Hot Topic. How can I help?" It was Jeff. He said sarcastically, "Since I'm only allowed to talk to you about the merchandise, what sort of pants do you have?" This arse made me give him a verbal description of every single style of pant on the sales floor before he ended the conversation, and all that dread came surging back, hitting me like a Mack truck. The phone calls died out quickly. I guess they just weren't doing it for him. Once again, I made the mistake of exhaling. Christmas was approaching, and I, cheered by my new Jeffless existence, decided to do my Christmas shopping at the mall before my shift. As I shopped, I noticed that someone began appearing at nearly every store I visited, and it wasn't Santa Claus. Of course, it was Jeff, materializing from the ether like a greasy spectre. First, I caught a glimpse of him from the corner of my eye at the gourmet popcorn shop. Then he was behind me at FYE. Next, I bumped into him in Nordstrom. I knew this was no coincidence. Jeff was following me, and I panicked. The whole experience was surreal, as if I was watching another woman's life. Robotically, I went into the food court for a gigantic Diet Coke, but Jeff was behind me again in short order. I made it clear that I saw him. He smiled and waved, but I didn't reciprocate. Instead, I turned around to face the counter. After a few minutes, I felt a tap on my shoulder. Suddenly, I was no longer frightened nor exhausted. I was pissed about the fact that this sticky man-child had hijacked my emotional well-being, and for what? I whirled around, demanding, "What do you want, Jeff?" Jeff was taken aback. "I haven't seen you in a while. I just wanted to say hi," he answered, as if my question had wounded him. "Bull, you're following me. I saw you at FYE. I saw you at Nordstrom. You've been following me through the mall." "Whoa, you're paranoid," he retorted, with just a touch of condescension in his voice. "Maybe, but I don't want you coming to where I work anymore when I'm there. I don't want you calling me at work. I don't want you tapping on my shoulder to say hi. I want you to leave me alone." And by the time I'd finished the sentence, I was shaking with rage. I didn't give him a chance to reply. I walked out of the line and headed for work. After the confrontation in line, I felt powerful for the first time in months. I wasn't sure that Jeff was gone, but I believed that I could handle things if he wasn't. Christmas and New Year came and went. I had put Jeff out of my mind. One night I was closing shift on Saturday. Saturdays are busy as hell in the mall, so the parking lot was usually full when I arrived. To avoid a long walk to the door, I parked around the back in one of the few scattered employee spaces. I exited the mall as I usually would, and then headed towards my car. In hindsight, I recognize how incredibly dangerous these lots were. The lighting was sparse and non-existent, and the spaces were relatively isolated. Unless someone happened to exit from a rear door, no one would even see a crime take place. Unlike the customer lot, which is in full view of the street. But I was dead to the danger that I was in until I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Hey." It was Jeff. For the first time, I appreciated how truly vulnerable I was. My mind began running disaster simulations. If he ran at me or tried to grab me, could I make it to my car? Probably not, my mind pronounced. Jeff seemed out of shape, but I was wearing impractical footwear which would inevitably slow me down. If I chose to scream, would anyone hear me? Maybe. Slowly, I turned around to face him. "Hey," I said flatly, trying my best to conceal fear. Then, much to my horror, he asked if I needed a ride. He was smiling a strange, cruel smile, and my stomach dropped. I was convinced that Jeff had done something to my car, like slashed the tires or something, perhaps the windshield. I asked him why he would ask me that, while I was on my way to my own vehicle. He didn't answer me. So I turned around and continued to my car, walking as quickly as I could manage. He caught up to me with ease. He then proceeded to tell me that I was horrible for speaking to him the way I had, and that he had every right to visit any store he wished. He had more to say, but I couldn't seem to process his words. I was in full flight mode, and my brain was screaming that I urgently needed to get into my car. I reached the door, but struggled to unlock it because my hands were shaking. Jeff was still sprouting just over my shoulder. My battle with the key seemed to stretch on for eons. I probably fumbled only for a moment though, and I heard the comforting pop of the lock, and I quickly yanked the door open and slid inside, pulling the door shut after me. Outside the driver's side window, in the dim light, I could see Jeff's face. His expression seemed to be a melange of hurt and rage. What happened next seemed to occur in slow motion. Jeff was reaching for my door handle. Reflexively, I slammed the lock button with just seconds to spare. I genuinely have no idea what would have happened had my reflexes been a tad slower that night. I sped away high on adrenaline. I never saw Jeff at the mall again, but I constantly feared another encounter. Once your illusion of safety is shattered, it's difficult to repair. I know that Jeff lived in town since he had attended my high school. I feared that he knew where I lived. The next escalation could be to my very home. He now knew the make and model of my car, assuming he didn't before, and the car would be easy enough to find if anyone were determined to do so. Fortunately, none of these nightmare scenarios came to be. Years later, I received a friend request from Jeff. I accepted, not sure why. Some part of me was still afraid to anger him. Another part thought it might be safer keeping tabs on him. And another part of me wanted to prove that I was no longer the scared girl I had been. Almost immediately, Jeff messaged me. Much like the first encounter in Hot Topic, the contents of the message were fairly benign. How are you? How have you been? That sort of thing. I offered him monosyllabic responses, hoping to discourage further contact. As before, it quickly escalated. I received long paragraphs about a girl who broke his heart, and reminiscing about me. He told me that he used to watch my friend and I outside on the lawn at her house, having oh-so-goth picnics under an umbrella in the rain. Suddenly I realized why Jeff had initially seemed so familiar to me. He and my friend rode the same bus, and I often accompanied her home. Jeff had been on the bus. I vaguely recalled him knocking on her door one day with a bag of Cheetos or some such snackable nonsense. I felt violated, knowing that I had been surreptitiously watched, and these were simply the moments that he admitted to observing. I had no idea if there were other occasions that he didn't wax nostalgia about. I couldn't quite process that. Who spies on someone and then reminisces with them about how they'd spied on them? Did he think it was cute? Did he think I would find it cute? I left Jeff to read, but took screenshots of the messages, and I woke up the next morning with a glut of messages, most which were sent in the wee hours of the morning. He told me that he would not be ignored, disrespected, or pushed away. He rhetorically asked why I thought I could get away with this, and he sent me a link about ghosting and narcissism, obviously insinuating that because I hadn't responded to this revelation that he had been spying on me, that I was therefore ghosting him, and consequently a narcissist. He said that he was so depressed and lonely that he contemplated suicide on a daily basis, and all he wanted was a friend. I wasted no time in screenshotting his messages, reporting him and blocking him. I told this story to a group of friends one night. This made me curious about the ultimate fate of Jeff. I reached out to a friend who remained plugged into hometown gossip and learned that Jeff had been arrested for domestic violence and sexual assault against his 17-year-old girlfriend. I couldn't help but shudder at what might have happened if I didn't slap that lock button so quickly that night in the parking lot. To those of you out there who might be struggling with Jeffs of their own, 1, you should know that it isn't mean or judgmental to trust your gut. If I had cut Jeff off on that fateful day in Hot Topic, things may not have escalated. 2, don't hesitate to reach out for help. And 3, as powerful as it may feel to confront demons from your past, don't risk further victimization. Abusive stalkers seldom change. And to Jeff, wherever you are, let's never meet again. I am in my mid-40s. This happened way back when the world was not such a scary place. I was born with kidney disease and had several surgeries from 1 to 11 until they got it right. This instance was when I was about 5. I had just been released from the hospital, and my mum had to stop at the pharmacy, the only one in our little town, on the way home from me being discharged to pick up my meds. She pulled into the strip mall where the pharmacy was located. Apparently some store was opening in the center, because there was music and I saw balloons everywhere. But I was tired. I had been laying on the back seat and remembered looking out and laying down and Mum locking the doors. Rolling down my back window about 5 inches, as we live in Florida, so you never sit in the car with the windows up, and telling me not to leave the car. I think I fell asleep. I awoke to the horror of an arm reaching through the window, unlocking the door. It was a clown. A clown was coming to get me, kill me for all I knew. I never trusted clowns. He opened the back door, and I jumped over the seat into the front and laid on the horn, screaming like a wild child. My mother and everyone within earshot came running. The clown was apologetic, offering a twisted balloon in the shape of a giraffe, saying, "He just wanted to give it to me." No thank you, no way, I was inconsolable. And that began my unnatural fear of clowns. I even hated Ronald McDonald. Sorry, a clown is a clown, a person hiding their face, and even at 5, I had no time for that. Fast forward 2 years, I'm 7, in the hospital sharing a room with 2 other kids and a free bed. For those of you who don't know, kidney problems are miserable. You have to pee, you can't, and when you do, it hurts badly. I'm just out of surgery, and we get a visitor to cheer us up. Clowns. I'm groggy and losing my mind, screaming, again, crying inconsolably. Why the hell are there clowns in my room? I didn't ask for them, I'm sick and in pain, get the hell away! After they remove the clowns, and the nice nurse sits with me until I fell asleep, I wake up with a friggin' giraffe balloon that a clown had left for me. I know it was probably coincidence. I think giraffe is the basic balloon animal required for clown college. In any case, I'm an adult now, and I swear to heavens if any clown approaches me, I will consider it a threat on my life and dropkick the sick SOB. I needed a new roommate quickly, and eventually settled on this chick from Florida who was moving out to San Diego. She initially came off as a little goofy and naive over the phone, but in person she was just strange. She had no sense for personal boundaries, would eat all my food, use my laptop in my room when I wasn't home to go on plentyoffish.com, and would barge into my room when I had friends over to say the weirdest stuff. All in the first week. She did that and said a ton of weird things in the months she lived with me. She started hanging out with a co-worker from Subway, along with her co-worker's boyfriend, who just got out of jail, and his 4 friends. They really only came around because she would buy stuff, and they laughed at the dumb things she would say. She would always leave the window cracked open because she lost her keys a lot, and would talk about how she did it all the time. Anyway, her friends broke into the house, stole my TV, my laptop, the smaller TV I had in my room, this wedding dress my aunt wanted me to sell on eBay for her, and a bunch of DVDs, and my prescription glasses. I call her freaking out, and she was just getting home and said she had just called the cops on me because her broken laptop got stolen, and suggested I took all my stuff out of the apartment to steal her crappy broken laptop. The cops came and pulled me aside and told me she seemed unstable, and suggested that I not use Craigslist for roommates anymore. I had her backed against the wall and was screaming at her with my finger in her face when the cops walked in. I thought I was screwed when they saw that, but after talking to her for 5 minutes, they seemed to understand my frustration. The cops took down what was stolen, and I took her key away and put her box full of crap outside. I eventually got my own stuff back because I made up some rubbish about having hidden cameras, and I wouldn't show them to the cops if I got all my stuff back, and somehow that worked. Moral of the story: don't use Craigslist for roommates. I have strikingly red hair, and in my earlier encounters, I was dressing a bit more alternative. Glossy combats, flowery velvet pants, fur coat. I was always in black and always had strong makeup because I liked it. Strange encounters were not uncommon with me. I've had plenty of homeless men approach me and offer me money for stuff, and because of that I was more careful. Every single encounter that I was dragged into, some of my close friends had to know in case something actually happened to me. My first encounter was with this man, when it happened at the end of sophomore year in high school. I went to the cinema with 2 of my friends and we were watching Love, Simon. Months before I had dyed my hair red, and it was honestly the best decision of my life. For that occasion I went with the worst rainbow eyes you could think of. When the movie was over we exited the mall, and while we were talking a dude approaches us, tall, extremely thin in shorts and a t-shirt, with a big rose tattooed on his fist, and asked if we could borrow his phone for a quick call. My phone died out in the cinema, so I tell him no, as well as my other friend, but the third girl says it's okay and dials the number. He's spoken to the phone about some money, and some Gucci jacket he wanted to buy with that money. When he hangs up, he turns to me and tells me I look like Bella Swan from Twilight, and how I have pretty red hair, and asks for my Facebook. I was like, yeah, sure, I don't use Facebook anyway, and I searched up myself and pressed add. When I returned to my dorm, I opened Facebook and decided to scope the situation out, and freaked out. He had this long rant about how no woman wants him, how they're all dumb because he's so beautiful and screwable, and no one's noticing that, and I block him. This was June of 2018. After that, nothing happened. I forgot about him and all was well. In my junior year of high school, I went to McDonald's after school because that morning was when my boyfriend broke up with me and I wanted to treat myself so that I didn't cry anymore. And I was wearing makeup because I did cry during morning and I couldn't go to school like that. The summer I cut my bangs and grew my hair, I looked like a completely different person. I was minding my own business, watching some videos on my phone when someone violently taps on my tray. I look up and I see it's him. My blood runs cold. He delivers this creepy smile and tells me how beautiful I am, and asks me if I will be his girlfriend. I decline. He asks why, and then I say I'm taken. He says okay, and goes back to talking to someone on the phone. I resume eating and try to ignore how hard my heart is pounding. I alert one of my friends that's still in school next to the mall, and he says that his class is soon to be over, but if the situation escalates, he'll come over to pick me up. Not soon after, he taps again. He tells me I played Eurojackpot, which is a big lottery game in Europe. I'm sure I'll win. I'll buy you anything if you want to, you just be my girlfriend. I decline. He asks me if my ex-boyfriend is prettier than him, and I say, yes. He just gets up and leaves. This was February 8th, 2019. After that, I found out about him from my friend. His name, some of his past. He's a known drug addict in the town. His father works as a lawyer on court, and no drug dealer wants to work with him because he knows he throws a lot of people under the bus. One cold evening, I was waiting for my boyfriend at a bus stop. I looked like a mismatched idiot with my fur coat on top of sweats, running shoes and a beanie, just rolled out of an afternoon nap. He approached me and flat out asked me to be his girlfriend. While I was declining, my boyfriend comes and asks what's happening while eyeing him up. The dude pales up, says goodbye and leaves. That was March of 2019. Starting my senior year, I found out even more. Basically, his parents didn't want him, so they just bought him a flat as a 12-year-old boy and left him to take care of himself. He fell into bad company, and that resulted in his speed, later heroin addiction, and the addiction probably triggered some mental problems, and people speculate he's probably schizophrenic because how often he was seen yelling at the air, like someone was there talking to him and having a rapid body movement all the time. One of my friends saw his dad beating him almost to death in the parking lot, and people had to jump in just to separate them. One nice sunny day, my friend and I decided to doll up and go somewhere in the forest to smoke some weed. We went to a fast food place, ordered, and sat out to eat. In the middle of my bite, I hear someone yelling, "Hey!" I look in front of me and see him striding towards us. My friend is losing it, and I start to feel panic creep over me. He steps on her side of the table, and the conversation goes, "Hey." He greets, and I just stare blankly at him because I'm still in shock. "How are you?" "Good." At this point, I'm trying to get over this as quickly as I can because people are staring. "I was just going to someplace and wanted to ask if you want to come with me because, I was going somewhere and I wanted to ask you. I'm busy right now, so no. Are you taken?" "Yes." I wasn't. I just didn't want him to harass me anymore. "Will you give me your phone number?" "No." And a question that made me lose my sanity and that sent me directly to anxiety attack. "After everything I've done for you?" "Yes." He says goodbye and leaves, yelling to someone in front of him who we can't see, and I start to cry as I feel overwhelmed. My friend was trying to calm me down. This was summer of 2019. Later on, I'm sitting at a bus stop on a wall. It was wash day, so I had some gym clothes on and was waiting for my friend from the incident before. I see someone sit at my feet. I look up and it's him, smiling at me. I straight up tell him that I don't have time for his nonsense today and that I wanted him to go. He yells at me that he was just sitting there and storms off. This was October 2019. After that, I'd only seen him around town in passing. I'd always hide my face when I'd see him going towards my direction so I can avoid him. I changed up my style a little bit as well, so that I wouldn't have to be noticeable in the crowd. My hair is still red. I don't want to dye it. I carry pepper spray and always try to walk the walk to seem unapproachable. And I don't have to go through unwanted conversations anymore.
Before the story begins, I need to share some information with you. I'm a 24-year-old woman from a small town in the north of England. At the time of this story, I was 22 and enjoying my first girls' vacation in Alcudia, Mallorca, Spain, with another friend called Lizzie. So the event happened on the first day of our holiday. Earlier in the day we had arrived and decided to take a look around. Me being cold, I decided not to wear sunscreen, which I would come to regret later. In the evening, while looking at my skin, I noticed that I was red raw, especially on my legs, and wanted to numb some of the pain that was already irritating me. Lizzie and I decided to go out for drinks and see the town. The night was warm, and we were in a state of bliss, going from one bar to the next, enjoying cocktails and countless shots. The first girls' holiday was starting off amazing. While out, we happened to find an English bar tucked within a street next to the small canal that ran through the town and led to the sea. Lizzie, who was already feeling out of her depths and struggling with the Spanish language, decided that the bar would be the best place for us, even though I, for one, was dreading it and preferred the Spanish bars. I had, after all, come all this way to get away from England. This bar was covered from top to bottom with English flags, sticking out like a sore thumb beneath the lights of the town. In truth, it was a horrendous sight, one which the drink flowing through me couldn't hide. So going inside, we ordered a few cocktails once again, and we sat down at a booth in the corner. While we were drinking, I could feel the sensation of someone staring at me. Even though we were in a booth, it seemed like whoever it was staring through the booth, and in the back of my head I asked myself, is someone staring at us? I asked Lizzie with a frown, feeling nervous. Something didn't feel right. It felt like someone had run ice down my spine. I don't know, she shrugged drunkenly, not caring or looking up from her cocktail. Letting out a sigh of frustration, I reluctantly turned my head and locked eyes with a man standing, drinking at the bar. He was no older than 30, with dark hair, dark eyes and a beard, and incredibly tall to boot. It was his eyes that caused me to flinch slightly. They were so dark and filled with nothing but fury. The more I looked at him, the more his expression became ever more unwelcoming. Had I done something to upset him? Was this his booth? Surely not. I'd only walked into the bar and ordered drinks, and no one there was ordering at the time, so I couldn't have pushed in. Turning away, I tried to ignore his glare, and I stayed there for a few more moments until Lizzie finished her drink before declaring that I needed the toilet. By this point, every red flag in the history of red flags was going off. Walking to the bar, I asked where the toilets were, only to be told they were in the back, which meant I would need to walk around the glaring stranger. I thought about just holding my pee in until I got back to the hotel, but I didn't know when that would be. So, pulling up my big girl panties, I followed Lizzie, who was already heading in the direction of the toilets. As I passed the man, I kept my head straight and refused to look anywhere but at the wall. That was until I felt something connect with my leg, followed by pain. Quickly looking down, I managed to catch his foot pulling away from my leg and back to the floor. He'd just kicked me. I stared down in shock for a little while as his laugh filled my ears before I took off running into the toilets. They were tiny and had no lock. There was a sink with a tiny mirror and then a stall which fortunately did lock. While Lizzie was resting against the sink, I hurried in and began to do my business. As I sat there, I looked down at my badly sunburnt leg and saw the imprint of a muddy heel print on my left leg. He really had kicked me. Grabbing some tissue, I roughly tried to erase the print. I was angry and also shocked. I didn't understand why he was so angry. While I sat there peeing and debating my next move, I heard the door open. "This is the girls' toilets, boys next door," I heard Lizzie say, in her carefree and unaware tone. For some reason, I knew I had to get out there and get Lizzie outside. "I know, lass," a rough Irish voice replied, followed by a laugh. The laugh. It was him. He followed us in. "I'm here to see if you want to have some fun." Yep, we were dealing with a creep. Pulling up my pants, I want to open the door only to find the lock was jammed. Typical. "What kind of fun?" Lizzie asked innocently. "Don't talk to him," I screamed in my head, desperately trying to pry the door open. "I have coke. Do you want to buy some? We can go somewhere to take it if you're up for it, you and your friend." "No, we don't do drugs," Lizzie answered him sternly, now suddenly sober, making me feel relieved. It would be easier to get out of this mess if we were both in the right mind. "You sure? Aren't you looking for a bit of fun? Come on, girls. I promise I won't bite." The charm of the Irish accent was no longer charming. "Look, mate, I said no. Can you get out the girls' bathroom?" That's my girl. As dumb as Lizzie could be sometimes, at least she was a stern woman when she needed to. "Alright." And with that, the creep grumbled and left. I readied myself to give him a piece of my mind, stepping out of the toilet with the nastiest glare, when I managed to catch the back of him walking away as the first door swung closed. "We need to leave," I said to Lizzie, giving her a shared pointed look. "Yep." Once again, Lizzie took the lead and exited first. I could see we were both praying he wouldn't still be there, but as we turned the corner, he was there as before, drink in hand, glare on face. Taking my hand, Lizzie squeezed it and began quickly dragging me past him. As I passed, he kicked me once again. As he did so, I turned and gave him my harshest stare. "Kick me again, mate, see what happens," I yelled, taking a step closer. Seeing the stunned look on his face, I allowed Lizzie to start pulling me away. "Yeah, you got nothing to say now, do you, creepy dickhead?" Looking back now, it probably wasn't the best thing to do to make a creep angry, and you'll see why after what happens next. But once I open my mouth, there really is no stopping it. We leave the bar and continue on our night, exploring other bars and completely forgetting about the creep. It was around 4 AM when we decided to make our way back towards the hotel. We'd gotten about halfway there when we heard a voice shouting from behind us. "Get here, you stupid girls." We turned our head and saw the Irish creep standing a few paces behind us on the opposite side of the road. Why did he have to be here? Neither of us said anything or looked at each other, and turning away from him, we walked a bit faster, wanting to put distance between us. Even with him on the other side of the road, we didn't feel safe, and unable to stop myself, I kept glancing over at him each second to see him match his pace with ours. "I said get here. No one disrespects me. I'll teach you both a lesson, you horrible little teasers." He continues to rant on, his voice getting louder and angrier with each word he spat. He then went into horrific detail on what he was going to do to us. It was extremely graphic, very disturbing, and involved rape as a minimum. Knowing the situation at hand was now incredibly serious and dangerous, I leaned into Lizzie and whispered that we needed to find help, but all the bars around us were now closed and no one else seemed to be on the streets, just us. Turning to look at him again, I saw something shiny in the light glistening under the streetlights as he suddenly took charge and raced towards us. As he got closer, I saw it was a knife, and feeling my blood run cold, I let out a startled yell. "Run! Lizzie, we have to run!" Running as fast as I could in a blind panic, I pushed and pushed on Lizzie's back, trying to get her to run faster and make sure she was in front of me. If one of us was going to get caught and die, it would be me. My first thought was to keep Lizzie safe. She was one of my closest friends, and if something happened to her and not me, I would be devastated. "Don't run, I just want to play," cackling as he said that. I could hear his footsteps slamming against the ground as he gained on us. I never looked back, but I could picture his face in my head, the twisted grin and the knife in hand readying itself to go into my back. Where had he even got the thing from? It made me wonder if he planned to hurt someone tonight, and me and Lizzie just happened to be the targets he set his sights on. "A bar! A bar!" Lizzie yelled, pointing to the side of me, and turning my head, I saw a bar, the lights on and a few people still in. Rushing forwards as fast as we could, we slammed into the bar doors and basically fell inside, startling everyone. We close! We close!" We heard a man behind the bar call out in broken English, waving his hands at us. "Please," I whispered, walking towards him. "We're being followed." "No, we close." He started it again. So I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, desperately trying to put in Google Translate what I needed to convey to him so that he wouldn't kick us out. "We're being followed. Please, he has a knife. Please." My words came out fast and panicked as I struggled to use my phone, my fingers no longer wishing to work. And then someone said, "It's all right, ladies. You're safe." We heard a voice say that and turned to look, seeing a man sitting at the bar with a young girl who we came to learn was 16 and the owner's daughter. Luck was on our side that night, and I felt so fortunate to have met the great man sitting at the bar. He was northern just like us, and came from the town next to ours. He actually now lived here, and was the owner's best friend and was able to translate what we were saying. Springing into action, both the owner and his friend raced out the door and began looking for the guy, while the owner's daughter did her best to comfort us. I'd like to say there's more to the story, but unfortunately there isn't. The Irish creep was just gone, and the owner of the bar took us back to the hotel, making sure we weren't out of his sights until he knew we were safely inside. The rest of the holiday was fun, and we never saw the man who chased us again, but things took a turn for the worse for me. Remember the beginning of the story when I got badly burnt? There were second-degree burns, and I ended up contracting an infection and was stuck in the hospital battling sepsis once I returned home. I was in agony for weeks, but fortunately I'm fully recovered now and doing well. So to the Irish creep, let's never meet again. And a note to myself and anyone else listening, always wear sunscreen, even if you think it's cold.
My mum and stepdad are ranchers. They got a new work truck, and consequently, put the older one up for sale. A lady from another rural area about 4 hours away was very interested, but gave numerous reasons as to why she would be unable to drive even halfway to get the truck. My stepdad is nice to a fault, so he convinced my mother to follow in a second vehicle that Saturday so that he could drive the truck there. My mum's no fool, and the lady was already making her suspicious. Well, her feelings weren't helped when they arrived, and the lady gave a convoluted story about bank problems and presented a post-dated check. She also begged my stepdad to leave the plates in his name. My mum excused herself, grabbed stepdad, and had a heated argument about taking the check and the plates. Mum won on cancelling the plates, but lost on the check. So they drove another 4 hours home, and as anyone, not my stepdad, guessed, the check bounced when it came to the date it was written. The woman dodged phone calls for a while, eventually answering and giving another convoluted story about being in the hospital and on and on. Stepdad for once stood his ground and told her they would be taking back the truck. So they drove another 4 hours there, this time with a flatbed in case parts were missing or something. No one answered the door at the property. They found the truck in a shed and loaded it up. Stepdad had tried to keep Mum from saying what was on her mind, but while she was busy securing the load, she wrote something to the effect of, "Thanks for nothing, hope you enjoyed messing us around," and slipped it under the door. 15 minutes later, as they were driving home, the cell phone rings, and the lady who was supposedly hospitalized was on the line, saying that she was going to take the note to the RCMP and have them charged with harassment. At that point, my mum reminded her she would have to be the one to explain her own attempted fraud. Crazy lady hung up, and they never heard from her again. Never take post-dated checks. I live in Tucson, Arizona, the most boring place possible. So for the day I turned 18 there, there's really only one thing fun to do on your 18th birthday. Go to the strip club. I had a friend who we will call Trish. She was excited to take me to the club for the first time, and I was excited. I didn't even care who took us, which now I know I should have. Trish introduced me to her friend called Sandy. She was a tomboy kind of girl. You could tell she was a lesbian, and she was with her two cousins that were around 30 to 35. They were definitely too old to be hanging out with 18-year-olds, but like I said, I didn't have a care in the world. Once we were ready to go, looking all excited and cute, Sandy and her two cousins came and picked me up. They took us to the only strip club that would allow 18-year-olds in, since they didn't serve alcohol. We got there, and my friend was stuck in the car since she lost her ID. So I was stuck inside with both the men around me. Pretty awkward. They were pretty quiet at first, but slowly opened up more and started tossing so much money to the strippers. We were having a really good time. After hours, we decided to go home. I was getting so tired I didn't have the energy to go all the way home, so Sandy offered to let me stay at her house with her two male cousins, which I now know was the biggest mistake. I mean, I barely knew them for one, and second, they were way older men. We get to Sandy's house, and I passed out fast in one of the empty rooms. I woke up to a loud scream that was coming from a man. My friend and I instantly got up. One of the male cousins burst into the room and began yelling that we had taken his money. He began throwing everything around him, breaking things, and I sat there scared, thinking this was the end and that I was going to die. Me and Trish kept screaming that we didn't take anything. But no matter what, he went on and on about how he had $200 in his cabinet in the room we were staying in and it was gone. He said he had been looking for it all morning and that we had to be the ones to have taken it. He started to order us to give him our purses and phones. My phone was completely dead, so I couldn't even call for help. He then made me call Sandy. I guess she had gone to the store real quick. He went crazy telling Sandy how he knows we stole the money. Then he calmly handed me the phone and Sandy said to us, "You guys aren't going to be able to go anywhere. I'm going to go home and strip search each of you." My heart sank so low. I've never been this scared in my whole life. You only see these things in movies. Luckily Trish had a mouth on her, so she wasn't backing down to anyone. He went to grab her purse from her, and she went at him, and they both ended up in a brawl. I knew this was the time. I had to get help before Sandy came. I looked crazy. I had just woken up and was wearing the long t-shirt given to me to sleep in, so I can only imagine what people were thinking seeing a little girl dressed crazy wailing for help while running in the street. I ended up going into the first store I saw. I ran so fast in the door, begged to use the phone, saying someone was holding my friend hostage. The workers and customers stared at me for what felt like forever, and finally the manager snapped out of it and let me. I called the police, and while on the phone I saw my friend running out the house. I knew she had been able to get out because she had gotten scared, and he knew I was calling the cops. We waited on the other side of the street for the cops to come, and we saw the male cousin walk out the house and run in the opposite way, obviously trying to flee the cops. The cops didn't do anything. It was aggravating to know that if this had happened the day before while I was 17, they would have rammed in there, but since I was now 18, we weren't even taken seriously. I bet a lot had to do with how we looked. We decided to just keep walking and try and find someone to let us use their phone. Most people said no. I'm pretty sure they thought we were thieves by how we looked. When finally one lady did let us use her phone, we were so far from Trish's house, so I just had to call my dad to pick us up and take us back to Trish's. My dad said yes, so now it was just a waiting game. While waiting for my dad, I had heard someone in the distance. Once I realized who it was, my heart dropped. It was Sandy and her two male cousins. They were in the car, following us, trying to chase us down. We ended up running so fast to a small liquor store, but right behind us was Sandy, running straight towards us, yelling and begging for us to come back to the house. She would not let up no matter how many times we said no. She kept apologizing, and for a second I thought I believed her, until I looked at the car and saw the male cousin that had accused us of stealing his money. He gave us the most evil stare. Finally, after what seemed like forever, my dad showed up and we ran to his car. While we were driving off, we looked back and saw Sandy and her cousins staring straight at us. They looked so angry. I can't imagine what would have happened to us if we'd have gone back. I mean, the promise of a strip search and all the horrors that I could only imagine would happen next because of the money we had never even taken. I know it would have been more like hostages than company. Months later, after finally putting the event behind me, I had moved into a new apartment complex. One day as I was going to throw the trash out, I randomly started to have a bad feeling. I looked around and saw that man, the one that had accused us of stealing the money. I ran fast into my apartment, and from that day on had my boyfriend throw out the trash instead. Luckily, I saw a new family move into the apartment he was living in. It was a huge sense of relief. So, to the man who spent $200 on strippers, forgot, and then blamed me, please, let's not meet again.